Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We will get started in just about a minute or two. If you could gather your materials, take a seat, and we would like to thank all of the testifiers for joining us. All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the members, staff, and of course to our testifiers for joining us here today. I would like to call this joint meeting of the House Energy and Consumer Protection, Technology, and Utilities Committees to order at 11:01. Nick, will you please call the roll?
Chair Fiedler.
Here.
Representative Boyd. Representative Brown.
On leave.
Representative Serrato. Here. Representative Davidson.
On leave.
Representative Donahue. Here. Representative Friel.
On leave.
Representative Dural.
Here.
Representative Inglis.
On leave.
Representative McAndrew.
On leave.
Representative Pielli.
On leave.
Representative Rusnock.
Online. On Teams.
Representative Steele.
On Teams.
Representative Venkat.
Here.
Chair Causer.
Here.
Representative Armanini.
On leave.
Representative Barton.
He's online.
Representative Cook.
Here.
Representative Ham.
He's
Online.
Representative Kale.
On leave.
Representative Kephart.
Online.
Here online.
Representative Mihalik.
On leave.
Representative Rapp.
Online.
Representative Stambaugh.
Present.
Representative Warner.
He's on leave.
On leave.
Representative Williams.
Here.
Attendance is recorded. Proceed, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, please call the roll for Consumer Protection. I'm sorry, Sean.
Acting Chairman Gallagher.
Here.
Chairman Burgos.
On leave.
Representative Benham.
On leave.
Representative Borowski.
Here.
Representative Cephas.
On leave.
Representative Haddock.
On leave.
Representative Hohenstein.
On leave.
Representative Isaacson.
On leave.
Online.
I'm sorry, online.
Representative Malagary.
On leave.
Representative Mullins.
On leave.
Delegary's on.
On Teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Representative Monroe.
On leave.
Representative Nelson.
Online.
On leave.
On team.
Teams. I apologize.
Representative Pielli.
On leave.
Representative Steele.
On Teams.
Chairman Metzger.
Here.
Representative Hogan.
Leave.
Here.
Representative Kale.
Leave.
Representative Kaufman.
Leave.
Representative Kutz.
Leave.
Representative Major.
Leave.
Representative Mahaffey. Representative Mihalik.
Leave.
Representative Rinkavage.
Leave.
Representative Tomlinson.
Leave.
Representative Warner.
Leave.
And Representative Williams.
Here again.
Real quick, I'd like to mention who's online. Representatives Benham, Representative Malagari, Representative Mullins, and Representative Nelson are all online. Thank you.
Sean, are we good with the roll?
Yes, Madam Chairman, we were good.
Thank you. And thank you to our members, testifiers, and guests for attending today's informational hearing on energy affordability. It is another cold day out there. In fact, I was expecting cold, and I got a little more than I even anticipated. It is a very cold day out there, and we know that people's utility bills and the price of energy are on everyone's mind. I'm reminded of the fact that every day back in my neighborhood in South Philly, folks come into our district office asking for help with something that is very simple and basic, but incredibly important, keeping their heat on. I know that's an issue across the Commonwealth, and certainly for working people. Well, the word affordability is now on just about every newscast you can see. It's not a struggle that's new to them. People have been having trouble paying their bills for a long time. Now that means utilities, groceries, student debt, medical debt, housing, and of course, energy prices going through the roof. I am glad that we have convened this joint hearing with our committees today. As we know, 1 in 5 Pennsylvanians had trouble paying their utility bills last year, and shutoffs are already up 38%. I can think of no more important issue for all of us to put our heads together on to try to find solutions for people across the Commonwealth than affordability. I'm excited to hear from our testifiers today, and I hope we can all learn from this hearing and come out of it with ideas for solutions. I'm not convinced that we alone and the Pennsylvania General Assembly can fix the problems we face single-handedly, but I am convinced that we will play a role, a very important role, in making that happen, so that people back home can simply have confidence that their lights will turn on when they flip the switch, and that they'll be able to pay their heating bill to stay warm. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chairman Gallagher for opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are here today because far too many Pennsylvanians, the monthly utility bill has moved from a routine expense to a source of genuine anxiety. As we sit here in January 26, we are seeing a perfect storm hitting our ratepayers. Skyrocketing capacity costs, recent PJM auctions have led to unprecedented price hikes and are now hitting home. Surging demand, the rapid expansion of data centers, and the ongoing electrification of our economy are putting a historic strain on our existing grid. Infrastructure pressures. While we modernize our aging systems, we must ensure the cost that progress doesn't fall solely on the shoulders of seniors on fixed incomes and working families. In Pennsylvania, heating your home in the winter or keeping the lights on for your small business is not a luxury. It's a basic necessity. Our goal today is to move beyond identifying the problem towards legislative solutions. We will hear from experts on energy demand, ratepayers, and we will examine how we can better protect consumer price volatility while maintaining the reliability our grid requires. I want to thank our witnesses for their testimony, my colleagues for their bipartisan commitment to keeping Pennsylvania an affordable place to live and work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair Causer, do you have any opening remarks?
I do, and thank you, Chairwoman Fiedler. Energy affordability is certainly a critical issue, and we know that this is a supply and demand issue. We know that demand is increasing rapidly here in the Commonwealth. We need policies that actually promote energy production, and that's why it's so important that we finally put an end to RGGI, and we need to put an end to other policies that have been proposed that actually limit our opportunities, such as the governor's press and pacer policies proposals that would actually increase energy costs in Pennsylvania. So I think we need real energy proposals that grow energy production in Pennsylvania, and I'm certainly looking forward to what our testifiers have to say today.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Metzger, do you have any opening remarks?
You know, today we're going to talk about the chickens coming home to roost. For decades, we've had policymakers making bad decisions where during the Obama administration shutting down coal-fired generators, regulators shutting down baseload generators, both nuclear and hydroelectric, and now we have a crisis. We have an affordability crisis because people in Pennsylvania can't afford their electric bills because we had policymakers making bad decisions for decades. And the crisis was intentional. It was intentional so that other sources of energy that were favored would become somehow affordable if you made electricity more expensive. That's why we're here today. And guess what? The consumers want not only affordability, but they want accountability from those who made those bad decisions. I'm anxious to hear how that pans out today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we have 10 experts with us to educate us on the causes of rising energy prices in their esteemed opinions and what we as legislators can do to bring down costs for people of Pennsylvania. Before we proceed, I just want to note two members joining us in person. Joining us is Representative Donahue and online, Representative Friel. Testifiers, thank you for being here today. Please know that members already have your written testimony available in their packets. So we ask that you, rather than summarize, that you summarize rather than read your remarks. That way we will be able to get to questions from the many members we have joining us today. In our first panel, we will have Asim Hawk, Senior VP for Governmental and Member Services at PJM Interconnection, Stephen DeFrank, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Utility Commission, Andy Tubbs, President and CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, and Daryl Lawrence, Pennsylvania Consumer Advocate. Thank you all for being here. And Mr. Hawk, would you please begin?
Yes, thank you, Chair Fiedler. Good morning, respected chairs and respected members of both committees. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. My name is Asim Haq. I head up governmental and member services at PJM Interconnection. So who is PJM? The easiest way to think about what PJM does on a day-to-day basis, we are a regional grid operator that is the air traffic controller for electricity across a multi-state power grid that is owned by multiple entities. We don't own any portions of that power grid. We are effectively navigating electricity across that multi-state and multi-asset owned power grid to try and, we are a mission-driven organization, keep the lights on for 67 million consumers across 13 states and the District of Columbia. We are fully regulated. We are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and again, a mission-driven organization purely. We have a control room that's out in Valley Forge. I see some very familiar faces who have come to visit us, and I invite both of these committees and any representatives who would like to see that function occur in real time, matching supply and demand and navigating those electrons through the bulk system to make sure that they can get to your utilities that Commissioner DeFrank regulates and to homes and businesses. Now, we do this with what is hopefully not a lot of fanfare. It is a very cold day today. We are, of course, concerned when the days are, we'll just give it 1 second here. No problem, no problem. We are, of course, concerned when the days are cold like this. We are expecting a pretty deep cold snap across the region next week. Last MLK Day, we experienced our highest winter peak of roughly 165,000 megawatts. And you all didn't know that because there were no service disruptions, and that's how we'd like to operate, is to do the work that our highly trained, certified grid operators do on a day-to-day basis, and try and deliver excellence in operations and reliability to all of the consumers in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We've already talked about supply and demand. Okay, this is the issue that we'll get to affordability in a second. We are most deeply concerned about from a grid reliability perspective. Okay, we are the sort of last line of defense from a wholesale perspective from what could be some pretty catastrophic consequences related to potential blackouts. And the closer we get, the tighter we get with the supply and demand imbalance, the more concerned that we are. The demand is being driven primarily by the proliferation of data centers. We just released what we call a load forecast, which is basically trying to project out how much demand is going to find its way onto the system. Last week, our most updated load forecast, and we are looking at, a pretty astronomical forecast of 241,000 megawatts by 2041. We are currently, I would think of us as a 180,000 megawatt system. That is a substantial amount of growth. The consultant McKinsey & Company has said that we are the largest market for data centers in the U.S., and our operators are going to have to manage the flow of electrons pretty skillfully in order to continue to meet our obligation, our mission-driven obligation to keep the lights on while all of this demand is increasing. The supply-demand challenge is your affordability challenge. In any market, when supply is tight and when the supply and demand fundamentals are tight, market prices increase. Doesn't matter if we're talking about electricity, doesn't matter if we're talking about eggs, doesn't matter if we're talking about avocado. When that supply and demand balance is thrown off kilter and demand is increasing while supply is not dramatically increasing or keeping up incrementally, that is ultimately the outcome. Now, it's important to note that PJM operates as a nonprofit. We do not benefit from high power prices. And in fact, as a mission-driven organization, we are, as you, concerned about the consumers in our footprint. We are concerned about our primary charges to keep the lights on, but we are certainly concerned about the impact that the supply and demand imbalance is having on consumers. Now, so let's just talk about solutions, okay? So if you really look at this fundamentally, Econ 101, if we are going to try and bring down power prices, you either have to gate the demand, so don't allow the demand to find its way onto the system, or you're going to need a lot more supply. Fundamentally, those are the two solutions to get at both the reliability challenge that's being created by the supply-demand issue, as well as downstream the affordability challenge. Now, it does not appear that there is a willingness to gate that demand, at least out of our governor's offices, as well as the administration in D.C. And there are very good reasons. This need to meet the AI race globally is certainly an important reason that you don't want to gate this demand. But if we are not going to gate demand, then we're going to need a lot more supply. So let's just talk about that for a moment. Now, PJM is not an entity that simply orders up supply. We run, especially as it relates to what we call deregulated or restructured jurisdictions, we run markets that send price signals that then suppliers are supposed to react to and build generators. Now, PJM, look, with respect to trying to bring new supply to the system, we're not going to be a barrier to that by any means. There'll probably be some folks that will mention PJM's generation interconnection queue, either on this panel or future panels. That is a process that stakeholders, it's a line that generators have to line up into to get studied electrically so that they can plug into the power grid. Well, that process has been reformed. Any generator that seeks to connect to the grid will be processed in a 1 to 2 year turnaround time frame. We've got a bunch of fast lanes in order to find your way onto the grid even quicker than that if you qualify for some of those fast lanes. I think our bigger concern right now is the generators that have found their way through a generation interconnection queue primarily have been of the renewable variety over the last few years. We currently have anywhere from the latest stats at the close of the year was about 63 gigawatts. I just saw some updated stats that placed it in the high 50s. Those resources are not constructing due to factors that are out of our control because they're through our processes. Could be supply chain, could be the financial investment environment, could be permitting and siting. So again, we are hopeful that we get a lot of supply onto the system. Some of that will be in our hands. Some of that will ultimately be with factors that are outside of our control, like I just referenced. The PJM board on Friday, there was a lot of activity on Friday. I'm going to summarize that very, very briefly for you all. There were two major events that occurred on Friday. The first was the PJM board making a decision on a stakeholder process that was held to determine how to integrate large loads onto the system. Okay, what were the elements of that decision? One, strengthening our load forecasting modeling and just doing more checks against that forecast. Okay, so the thought there is, again, we're talking about supply and demand. You're not going to gate the demand. You're going to need a lot more supply, but let's just make sure that we're measuring that demand in our marketplace appropriately. That's the concept of load forecasting and what we try to do with that particular element. I would say the second major element is, look, it takes 5 to 7 years to build, a generator conceivably. For some of the projects that are through our queue, it's been longer than that, okay? And so while we are trying to bring all of this new supply to the system, our operators are going to have to manage a tighter system. So one of the major decisions that we made was to, when things get tough on the system, was to ask effectively these data centers to move to their backup generators so we don't have to shut off residential consumers while these data centers continue to run. Now, we don't actually have the ability to say data center A shut down, data center B shut down. We don't have that ability, but we would effectively send the amount of load that is sort of commensurate with that dynamic to a entity who would then order to the transmission owner who would then order up that load shed. I want to compliment the Pennsylvania Office of the Consumer Advocate who presented on this very issue to the PJM board, and their proposal was in part a proposal that we adopted, reliability backstop procurement. So on top of the sort of marketplace that we're going to be running, there is this sort of backstop mechanism. The Trump administration and certain governors also produced a document of principles. There is some symmetry between the board's decision and what the Trump administration and all 13 governors in our footprint produced. Last thing, from purely a affordability perspective, PJM only has so much authority. It's on the wholesale side. There's quite a bit of work that can be done on the state side. I've written a piece on this in a piece of trade press called Utility Dive. You have a great chairman down here who I know is looking at these issues, but are you creating a customer class of data centers to allocate costs away from residential consumers to those data centers? Are you making sure that you are gating, for instance, data centers that are trying to find their way onto the system by requiring them to put money up front, and so on and so forth? There are a number of measures that can be taken on the state retail side, and I'll let the chairman and others look at that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much. It was a lot to cover, so I appreciate that. Chairman DeFrank?
Good morning. Chairs Fiedler, Causer, Metzger, Acting Chair Gallagher, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Committee members, I'm Steve DeFrank. I'm Chairman of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. I did summarize my testimony, and I will try to get through it as quickly as possible before Steve plays playoff music for me. Affordability is a fundamental responsibility that guides the Commission's everyday regulatory work. At its core, the Commission's function is to regulate natural monopolies that are primarily investor-owned. These monopolies provide essential human services that require high fixed capital investments. The Commission provides these entities with a monopoly franchise in exchange for the assurance that an essential service will be available, provided to all who require it, and priced at reasonable levels. The Commission's regulatory authority is based on a compact that gives utilities the opportunity to earn a fair return. This compact is firmly established in U.S. Supreme Court precedent, requiring commissions to balance the competing interests of consumers and investors. At the center of this balance lies affordability, the establishment of just and reasonable rates, ensuring customers have cost-effective access to essential service while allowing utilities to maintain and upgrade systems necessary for safety and reliability. Current macroeconomic conditions and energy market trends have brought utility affordability front and center. These include persistent inflation, supply chain constraints, burgeoning electric demand, and the inability to construct new baseload electric generation. Further adding to customer bills are the significant increases in electric transmission prices. The average cost of transmission has increased from $3.50 per kilowatt hour in 2001 to $17.70 per megawatt hour. I'm sorry, both are per megawatt hour in 2021, an approximate 400% increase. This storm of price headwinds resulted in an unprecedented number of general rate cases at the Commission in 2024, with 31 individual fixed utility rate case proceedings that year. This volume represents a challenge to the PUC's time and resources. Rate case proceedings are highly complex in nature and scope. Multiple hearings are held, numerous parties intervene and advocate for their interests, and significant volumes of testimonies, briefs, and discovery are added to the record. To give you an example, our most recent litigated rate case, Columbia Gas 2025, it was fully litigated, included over 15,000 pages of testimony and exhibits, a 552-page transcript, over 1,300 pages of briefs, more than 50 sets of discovery requests, a 687-page recommended decision, and a 433-page final order. This is compounded by the statutory time limit imposed upon the Commission. We must navigate these proceedings to final disposition within 9 months, or the rate takes effect as filed by the utility. We're cognizant of the impact the current regulatory climate has on customers and continue to dedicate our time, effort to help ease these burdens while ensuring utilities foster safe and reliable service. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing at the Commission now. I'm going to start with large load tariffs. The Commission has proposed a model tariff for large load customers designed to protect existing ratepayers from bearing the cost of infrastructure build-out to serve these accounts. Such distribution and transmission upgrades can be significant. Customers who do not benefit from these upgrades should not have to pay for the cost of the upgrades. Advocacy of FERC and the PJM interconnection. The Commission maintains an active voice advocating for Pennsylvania at FERC and PJM. The PUC has consistently filed pleadings of FERC on topics such as large load interconnection, transmission planning, and capacity market reforms. Most notably, given the significant increases in transmission costs noted above, we are currently evaluating reforms in the transmission market design at PJM, as we believe there are flaws in the existing cost and benefit evaluation process for some transmission projects. The Commission continues its work regarding consumer outreach and education. This work helps customers understand their options for assistance, reduce energy usage, and help taking action before affordability challenges become an issue. In 2025, we continued our Call Utilities Now campaign, emphasizing that contacting your utilities early is often the fastest way to access payment plans, assistance programs, and usage reduction options. We also hosted our Be Utility Wise events throughout the Commonwealth, helping to educate human service personnel about various customer assistance and support programs that may be available to customers in their area. In June 2025, the Commission issued a final implementation order for Phase 5 of Act 129, establishing criteria for a new round of energy efficiency and conservation programs by the state's largest EDCs. Phase 5 is projected to yield more than $1.4 billion in savings through the reduction or avoidance of approximately 3 million megawatts of electricity. In this new climate of rising costs, energy efficiency and conservation remain among the most effective tools in helping customers manage costs over the long term. I would now like to address some suggestions that the General Assembly can take per the committee memorandum. And we also have fixes to these that are in your testimony, but I'm not going to cover them now in the interest of time, but happy to get into them in question and answer period. Current net metering rules allow for the development, we'll start with net metering. Current net metering rules allow for the development of systems that have no load, but the project's parasitic load. This has created a ratepayer subsidized business model, whereby the developer can reap retail compensation for what is otherwise a wholesale merchant generation. Retail electric rates are approximately 50% higher than wholesale rates. In 2026, the Commission projects that the increased cost for these merchant generators could reach more than $95 million. The Commission further projects that cumulative annual costs could reach over $500 million if current pending projects all come online. Let me cover Tier 2 AEPS credits now. Closing the borders for Tier 2 AEPA credits, or AECs, has significantly altered supply and demand outlook for Tier 2 credits, resulting in an increase in compliance costs. The average price for a Tier 2 credit in 2020 was $1.92, resulting in a total Tier 2 compliance cost of $3.6 million. In comparison, in 2024, the average price for a Tier 2 credit was $26.47, resulting in total Tier 2 compliance cost of $354 million. We project these compliance costs will likely further increase each year. EDCs and NGDCs generally recover costs for their universal service and conservation programs from residential customers. Given the significant increase in electricity demand and associated costs being realized from data center proliferation, the General Assembly should consider having new large load users offset or pay additional funds for these programs to facilitate cost reductions for residential customers. Regarding municipal restoration, municipal requirements for restoration are a factor in the rising cost of replacing utility pipeline infrastructure. Some municipalities have ordinances that exceed PennDOT roadway construction standards. The Commission estimates that the average restoration costs for NGDCs have more than doubled in the past 6 years, from $340,000 per mile to $696,000 per mile. This increase happened in only 6 years. These expenses are ultimately rolled into NGDC rates. This issue involves a rather complex nexus between PUCs, NGDCs, municipalities, and PennDOT. As such, we think the General Assembly is a perfect body to help facilitate resolve to this issue. Regarding energy efficiency, as I stated above, energy efficiency is a vital component for customers to manage affordability. To that end, the Commission believes legislature should consider prudent updates and reforms to Act 129. And rate case timing. The Commission has a total of 9 months to review and conclude rate case proceedings. As explained earlier, failure of the Commission to issue a final order in a 9-month period results in the rate going into effect as filed by the utility. Given the complexity of today's rate cases, along with the increased volume, the General Assembly may want to consider extending the time period for the PUC to make a formal determination. Thank the committee for the opportunity to testify today and happy to answer any questions. Good?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Tubbs, you may begin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Fiedler, Acting Chair Gallagher, Chairman Metzger, and Chairman Kauser. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As you know, EAP and its members share your concerns about energy affordability. Our member companies serve nearly 9 million Pennsylvania families and businesses, and we hear from customers struggling with rising costs every day. That's why we're here, to help identify root causes and to work for meaningful solutions. So where are the costs coming from? In my filed testimony, I walk through the various components of both electric and natural gas bills. I'm not going to walk through those today, but I'm happy to answer questions about those. But I think the takeaway is that when you look at your utility bills, about 50% of the costs that are recovered are not costs that are controlled by the utility. Those are costs that are coming from supply, be it capacity and transmission costs, gas supply that we run through and just pass through to our customers, or state policies and procedures that we run through and programs that we operate through our businesses. Electric and gas utilities are responsible for managing their own operational costs and infrastructure investments, and that is something that we have to do in between rate cases, and I'm happy to discuss the components of that as well. But I think when we talk about the direct pass-through of costs, I think you look at the capacity costs, which have been much discussed in this body. It's $16 billion annually, up from $2.2 billion just 3 years ago. We also think we need to talk about retail competition. I think the residential market is an opportunity where we're starting to see customers not reap the benefits that were promised. The opportunities are there. I'm not suggesting that customers can't save. I'm just suggesting that looking at the results of 2024, our residential customers in aggregate for our electric and gas customers paid more than $400 million more than the price to compare.
And that is just a small percentage of the residential shopping customers. So if you look at the Consumer Advocate shopping statistics, and if you have anywhere between 10 and 20% of the residential customers shopping, and they're paying $400 million more in 2024, if you extrapolate that out to increased shopping, the impact would be significantly higher. So I think that the retail markets are an opportunity where we can make adjustments and insert some consumer protection and still allow customers to reap the benefit of shopping. I think other measures we can talk about are universal service programs. I think the chairman spoke to that. Annually, the electric utilities last year spent $589 million on universal service programs. These programs are important. I think, Chair Fiedler, you mentioned the importance of programs and keeping customers on. That's what these programs are for. At the present time, those programs are funded by other residential customers. So it's a cost that we are hypersensitive to because any costs that we pass through on those programs are being collected from our other customers who don't qualify for those programs. I think the chairman also mentioned the Tier 2 credits and net metering, and I'm happy to talk about those a little bit here in a minute. But I think it's really critical that we sort of make the distinction between pass-through cost increases as they flow directly to our customers, but also those that we run through our bills. I think another thing I want to highlight is that your electric and gas utilities are bedded here in your communities. We are economic engines that are really driving some of the success that we're seeing in Pennsylvania today. I think the investment, and we talk about supply and demand issues, there was a supply issue before data centers became the topic. I mean, we've had advanced manufacturing, we've had growth, and that's great news. And I think it makes a lot of sense because Pennsylvania is blessed with the natural resources to provide the energy to meet those needs. You also have the infrastructure in place that is being invested by your electric and gas utilities to meet the needs of customers. So it really is trying to find that right balance between encouraging investment in infrastructure and new development, but also at the cost, because you can never lose sight of the customer. And I can assure you that the companies and the Energy Association never lose sight of the impact on customers. I think that the customers expect reasonable rates and reliable service, and that requires policies that consider both. Immediate affordability is important, but we also need to make sure that we don't lose sight of long-term investment that is necessary to maintain service and reliability. And I will say that the members of the Energy Association, the gas and electric utilities, hire a significant number of employees across the state, and then you add the contractors that are on system every day. It's a significant part. And these companies are investing in all 67 counties of Pennsylvania. And a lot of these counties aren't seeing the investment in those communities. So this is an important economic driver, not just for the employees and for the companies, but for the people that live there to make sure they have safe and reliable service. So when we look at, there are real opportunities to save. I think Chapter 14, it was able to sunset in 2024 and eliminated important consumer protections regarding termination, payment arrangements, and utility service access. And why that matters to affordability, our arrearages have grown from $311 million in 2019 to $481 million in 2024. When customers can't pay or don't pay, that tab gets picked up by the other customers. And those good paying customers can end up paying for those customers that are not paying. And I'm not suggesting that there are not customers who need real help, and that is important. But there are customers who are able to pay and are not. And we need to talk about those customers and make sure that we have measures in place to ensure that they do. And that way, the programs that we talked about, that $589 million that we spent last year on universal service programs, go to those who actually need it. And I think that is vital important. Large load customers, we support the Commission's effort to develop a model large load tariff. We think Pennsylvania attracts energy-intensive development because, like data centers, we must ensure that there's fair allocation. And data centers and large industrial customers should pay for the infrastructure costs attributable to them for service and not shift those expenses to families and businesses. So we support those efforts, and we appreciate the General Assembly looking at those. Again, retail shopping I covered. I just think when you look at that $400 million last year, and you just sort of put it into context, that's more than 2 times the entire federal LIHEAP allocation for the state of Pennsylvania. That's more than half the annual cost of our universal service programs. That is a significant impact on residential customers, and we appreciate the efforts and the announcement of efforts to address and in place some consumer protection for those customers. AEPS, the chairman spoke to the Tier 2. when Act 114 was approved and we closed the borders on Tier 2, we sort of shut down who could participate in that market. And that has driven up cost. And that is real money. Going from up to $26.47 per megawatt hour from $10.86, that is driving large increases to those costs that are being paid by our consumers. And that's an opportunity for us, again, to investigate opportunities to save money in the short term that will be meaningful and impactful to consumers. The chairman also spoke to net metering. This is a much debated issue at the PUC. The companies are working through this in their default service programs to address this. What you really have are, you think about it, large sites by businesses who have a business model to develop solar power, which is great. We all want more power on systems. So we think this is, we should encourage this. But at the moment, they're using the net metering policy that the commission approved years ago that was meant for residential customers to incent them to have solar power and for them to get the benefits of having solar in their homes. And right now, they're breaking up into smaller sized systems in order to qualify for the retail to get paid the full amount going out. They are using the distribution system, the utility. They're benefiting from it. They're just not paying for it. And they're also not paying into the programs to help consumers at this time. It's a real concern. The chairman mentioned Act 129 reform. We have worked with the administration and with many to make changes to the Act 129. I think House Bill 505 contains many important changes. I think there's opportunities to further advance and improve on that as well. And I didn't leave capacity cost out. It's obviously been the elephant in the room in this building for the last year. And I think it's dramatic. And I think that we need to talk about those costs. Those costs are passed on to consumers through utility bills. Utilities do not generate profit off the sale of the generation because we are deregulated. What we need to do is really focus on what's going to take. And for the last 3 years, we've had higher prices. What we have not seen are large announcements of new generation coming online from independent power producers. And we need to start seeing some movement. Or otherwise we're going to be in real trouble. And I think so. I see Representative Stambaugh here. He has introduced House Bill 1272. I know that is much debated conversation here, and many view it as an anti-competition model. But I think at the moment, when this General Assembly had a concern about load forecast, you passed legislation in the budget to address utility load forecast. We are fully regulated. We are here, and we answer to you. At the moment, no one answers. Independent power producers, they don't answer to you. They don't answer to the governor or to others. I think we need some accountability to make sure that the payments that are going to these large independent power producers actually result in money being reinvested in Pennsylvania to make sure we're building generation where we need it. I'll end there, but I think the Energy Association, our members, stand ready to work with all of you to identify real opportunities to save. If we have questions on rate making, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lawrence, you may go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Fiedler, Chair Causer, Acting Chair Gallagher, Chair Metzger. I'm Darrell Lawrence. I currently have the honor of serving as the consumer advocate. I'd like to thank the chair and the committee members for holding these hearings on energy affordability and providing the OCA the opportunity to engage in these important policy discussions. So what are the drivers for the current surge in energy prices? I think my colleagues on the panel have laid this out well. I will not retread that ground at this point in time. I would also note that there are many, many more details in my written testimony, but I'm going to summarize them here today in the interest of time. Some numbers, according to PJM's Independent Market Monitor, forecasted data center and AI load accounted for $6.5 billion, or 40% of the $16.4 billion in costs from PJM's December 2025 capacity auction. Such load growth also has accounted for $21.3 billion, or $47.2 billion in capacity costs in PJM's last 3 capacity auctions. For PJM's 2025 Regional Transmission Expansion Plan, or RTEP as it's known, a record $11.6 billion of planned new bulk grid projects were recently sent to the PJM Board of Managers for approval this month. These costs, of course,
will be paid for by electricity consumers, with the residential customer allocation of these costs at approximately $9 billion. One part of this plan build-out is Project 237, a 221-mile, 765 kV single-circuit line traversing almost two-thirds of Pennsylvania that would require significant amounts of greenfield right-of-way at a cost of nearly $2 billion. In my view, the current system is flawed in that PJM does a very good job of defining needs that exist on the regional high-voltage grid, but proposed solutions to these needs are almost universally the building of new transmission infrastructure. As a result, potentially less expensive generation options, storage, demand response, and other innovative proposals are rarely, if at all, provided to PJM for consideration. To be clear, PJM has a very important mandate to keep the lights on. I have great respect for the work that PJM does in this regard, and my comments today should not be interpreted as denigrating the important work that PJM does. My comments here are to illustrate that there is a decided gap in how energy projects are currently planned. On the gas side, natural gas fuels a large share of Pennsylvania's electricity generation. And because gas markets are interconnected nationally and internationally, global supply disruptions, export pressures, pipeline constraints, and regional demand for heating and industrial use can push gas prices higher. Also, significant expenditures on replacing aging infrastructure and the use of alternative rate-making mechanisms to set distribution rates, base rates, are pushing consumers' bills higher. So what can the General Assembly do? Here are 3 actions the General Assembly can take right now. Number 1, data centers must pay their own way. As discussed in my written testimony, data centers are already causing electric prices to increase for consumers. Beyond the current market impacts, my office is currently seeing proposed transmission infrastructure build-outs to accommodate new data centers, where the costs of those projects are proposed to be largely allocated to existing consumers, not the data centers that are causing the costs. This situation must be rectified. In recent days, the Trump administration and Microsoft have both made statements reiterating the idea that existing customers should not face any increased electric costs due to data centers. I strongly recommend that this body vote in favor of legislation to ensure that any new data centers in Pennsylvania must pay for any and all costs that they are causing that would not have been needed but for the presence of a data center. Number 2, protect customers who roll off of their fixed-price retail electricity contracts. Many residential customers sign up for a fixed-price contract for a brief period due to attractive temporary prices, often 3 months. When the period expires, they may, without realizing it, be rolled over to a variable price contract whose price is much higher than their fixed-price contract. Customers should not be penalized for shopping for their generation supply, and the penalties are harsh. As my colleague Andy mentioned, for $400 million more paid in 2024. In my many discussions with consumers across the state, the message is the same. I've been burned once, and I'm never going to do this again. Is it any wonder that residential shopping statistics in Pennsylvania continue to hover around 20%? I won't belabor this point any further at this time. As you know, you will all hear much more on this issue in the next panel from my colleague and friend, Elizabeth Marks. My recommendation is that any shopping customer should be automatically returned to their utility's default service at the end of the fixed price contract, unless the consumer affirmatively chooses to stay with their provider. This simple change in the law will save Pennsylvania consumers enormous sums of money, and I strongly urge you to pass this much-needed legislation. Revenue normalization for natural gas customers. WNA mechanisms, as they're called, should no longer be authorized as an acceptable form of alternative rate making in Pennsylvania. Decoupling mechanisms, such as the WNA, fail to respect the long-standing regulatory compact in Pennsylvania because they shift business risk nearly entirely away from utility management and onto consumers, practically guaranteeing recovery of authorized revenues regardless of actual customer consumption, experience quality of service, or effective utility management. At public input hearings, consumers have expressed outrage over the thought of having to return to utility companies all or part of their hard-earned bill savings through their own conservation measures. On a theoretical basis, WNAs appeared initially to be reasonable, as they were designed as a two-way street. But experience and substantial evidence have shown that the WNA is a one-way street in favor of the utility's bottom line. Ratepayers have seen no benefit from WNAs, and this form of alternative rate making needs to end. My final recommendation will take a bit more time and effort to implement. Establish a Pennsylvania agency to coordinate integrated resource planning for the electric sector in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania should consider moving to what I would call a modified form of integrated resource planning, or IRP. IRP has been successfully used in many other states that are still vertically integrated, but IRP still has a place in restructured states like Pennsylvania. The goal of IRP is to consider all possible solutions to energy needs, including transmission, generation, demand response, emerging technologies, and others, to collectively find not just a solution, but the optimal solution to an energy need. This agency would proactively participate with PJM, generation owners, and other stakeholders, and address energy needs in Pennsylvania that are holistic in nature, not simply limited to building new transmission lines. This agency could send out requests for proposals for the benefit of Pennsylvania. I think it's entirely possible that existing Pennsylvania entities could serve in this role with the necessary modifications to their current missions. Having such an agency would fill the gap in energy planning that currently exists, and the OCA is happy to continue this discussion with any and all stakeholders who are interested. Again, thank you for inviting me to participate today, and I'll gladly respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Quite a panel one, so thank you all for being here. On our agenda, it says we will move to panel 2 in 20 minutes, so let's see if we can. With that, I'll just say I think there were a lot of really good ideas expressed there, and as a lawmaker, as somebody who's in my district office and hears from people directly who are really struggling, I think we've got to consider all the possible solutions. So I hope that my colleagues will join me in a robust bipartisan conversation about ways in which we can really help poor and working class people who are going to be hit the hardest by this crisis that's right on the horizon. I'll also ask if members could direct their question to one member of our panel. Mr. Hawk, my question is for you. What is the status, you mentioned it a little bit, but what is the status of PJM's efforts to streamline the interconnection queue to get more energy on the grid? We've heard that part of this problem is demand, and so if you could answer that, and if you could also describe for us examples of what can be done to gate demand, as you mentioned in your remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the PJM generation interconnection queue journey began in 2019. When we started to see a major uptick in projects, primarily renewable projects, that were trying to find their way onto the system. We saw 2 years of trending where we saw projects effectively double that were trying to find their way into the queue. Now, these are much different projects. Okay, they're much smaller projects than the typical sort of, we'll just characterize them as baseload projects that were many, many megawatts bigger. And so we had to reform how we analyzed these projects instead of sort of a serial chronological process, one of more of a cluster process. Now, long story short is we went through a stakeholder process. We got approval from our regulator to move to this new queue process. That backlog of projects that we had is effectively unbacklogged. So this year we will be churning out the fund. We began with over 200 gigawatts. We have less than 30 gigawatts left of that backlog. Right now, the queue is open for business. Anyone that tries to enter the queue will be turned around in 1 to 2 years. Their electrical study will be turned around in 1 to 2 years. That could get quicker based on partnership, ironically, an AI partnership we have with Google right now. That could get even quicker than 1 to 2 years. That is well in advance of any construction timeline for a generating resource. Again, our biggest concern right now is after all of this work, 4 or 5 years of work, okay, and we've churned out projects through the queue. We've had a number drop out for a variety of reasons. We're really focused on is getting steel in the ground, and we're not seeing a lot of that. Over the last 3 years, we've seen on average 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts connect, and that ain't going to get it done. We've got about 50, just running the numbers this morning, we've got about 55 gigs or so of projects that have received their approvals from PJM Interconnection, have nothing left to do with PJM, but they're not building out. And the reasons that we're given are, again, supply chain. And I feel for these developers, right? How they deal with global supply chain issues is a challenge. How they deal with a volatile investment environment with sort of policy swings is a real challenge. Siting and permitting has been a challenge for these developers, perhaps not in this state, but in many jurisdictions. Siting and permitting is a challenge. Everyone conceptually likes projects, but don't want them in their backyard. And so that is the current status of that whole generation interconnection queue reform effort that was underway. I think we're in a very good place with respect to the queue.
So you're saying that you feel like the main reason that these projects are not moving forward is unrelated to PJM and is based on the global supply chain issue, siting and permitting?
We've done the work to process this backlog of projects. And so, at this point, these projects have, 99 problems, but PJM ain't one of them.
Thank you for that. Chairman Causer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our testifiers for the information you've presented today. We've heard a lot about PJM with their queue and their policies. It seems PJM's become a whipping board for a lot of these issues. We know that the data center issue is a problem. It was a problem even before data centers started to be, coming into the state. We know that state policies are critical in going forward for power generation. We look at policies that are happening in other states like Maryland, taking off, significant amount of power generation, things that we can't control that other states are doing. So I have constituents that ask me all the time, why can't we go to our own grid? Now that seems like a drastic change, but at the same time, we have the energy here in this Commonwealth. We have the ability to produce the energy. What would a process look like to go to our own grid in Pennsylvania? Anybody could, I'd be interested in
I'm happy to begin.
Any info.
Yeah, I'm happy to begin. So the first thing that I would say is when we're talking about let's do our own thing. Now, the question that I would have is that from purely a market perspective, are you also talking about government standing up a control room and actually operating a power grid, moving electrons from point A to point B? Those are sort of two different things, and those are two different conversations conceivably to have. Would not recommend, in looking at what happened a few years ago with the winter storm in Texas, the sort of go-it-alone model can have its real consequences, both human toll as well as dollar amounts. It's a bit of a different animal because of their electric interconnectivity between the Eastern Interconnect and Western Interconnect, long story there. But certainly states do have the ability, if they don't want to, for instance, participate in the capacity market, to enter into what I would just characterize, what is characterized in the tariff as a fixed resource requirement designation. Now, to enter into a fixed resource requirement designation, you need to have enough supply to meet demand. Pennsylvania is has that ability, and you would effectively be able to set the terms of what the capacity, meaning I would believe it would be your PUC, would set the terms of what your capacity pricing would be. So that is the benefit of a state being long, and it's how it interplays with the marketplace if that's something that you decided to do.
And I'm not talking about an isolationist mentality. I'm talking about the fact that we can't control what's going on in other states. They're making poor decisions, and our ratepayers are actually paying to send energy to those other states. And so, constituents are saying, why don't you have your own grid? Chairman DeFrank, I'd be interested in your comments.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 points there. Are you talking a separate grid like Texas, or are you talking a separate ISO like New York? So New York's an integrated grid, but it's not standalone like Texas. So it's 2 different points there. And what I get this question asked a lot, should we leave PJM? And my response is, that's the easy part. Leaving PJM is very easy. The hard part is what happens after that. And that's what I think we have to be very cautious of, because prices can skyrocket if you go it alone. So that's the one point. In terms of your specific your specific question as to, how can we have more control over what goes out of our state? That's one of the issues that I brought up in my testimony, talking about transmission. We are going to be talking about PJM, and one of their projects we're not sure is a fair depiction of the entire picture. The picture of the departing zone, the zone the power is leaving, as well as the importing zone. So we're going to continue those conversations, but I think that may be better to address some of the issues that you're talking about, as opposed to just throwing everything out.
I think another, if I may, is I think right now the utilities have default service plans, and I think we could look at those default service plans and the procurement that we do. I mean, right now, the capacity increases you have seen are not a straight line from the increase rate to the customer bill, right? Because we have default service plans that are, the way that we purchase our power is regulated by the commission and approved through default service plans, and it's spread out, so you sort of try to ameliorate some of those costs. But rest assured, those increases in the capacity market will be recovered by customers. So again, I know folks have struggled with the idea of having a backstop, but the concern is of the utilities is that we have an obligation to provide service to our customers. And that's any customer that lives in your district or yours, be it residential or commercial. And we need to make sure that we have the power we need to fulfill those needs and requirements of consumers. And if it's not, if the independent power producers and the market's not delivering, then I think we need to have a real conversation about what's next and what is the answer to make sure that we don't lose the economic opportunities and we don't fail in delivering power to consumers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Acting Chairman Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. Mr. Lawrence, how can the General Assembly better educate our constituents on using PA power switch without falling victim to predatory energy supply contracts?
Yeah, certainly that's a great question. I think, first of all, PA Power Switch is a great resource, and my office has a series of articles, documents that we share with consumers when they call or ask about shopping, or when we come out to public events like senior fairs across the state and that we hand out. And it's probably the number one thing that we talk to consumers about is shopping. And what we're telling customers and what is basically in some of our literature is, look, you really want to look for a fixed price contract. Variable rate contracts, unless you're an energy expert, is probably not something you want to engage in. You want to look for contracts that don't have early termination fees, that also do not have monthly fees, which seems to be a popular choice currently for the marketers. They started adding these monthly fees. And they look small. The monthly fee looks small in a lot of contracts, but when you look at it, it can very quickly eat up any savings that there might be. And really the key point for us is, if you're going to engage in the competitive market for generation supply, you really need to engage, right? This is not like shopping for car insurance or homeowners insurance. People do that, every couple of years maybe just to make sure that the price is, in line with what they're paying. But shopping for generation supply is not like that. As I said in my testimony in the written materials, consumers opt for one of these very short-term contracts that's a very attractive price. But at the end of the 3 months, the way the law is right now, they have to affirmatively do something. They have to switch to another supplier or go back to their utilities default service plan. If they do not do that, and that's where the $400+ million comes in, that consumers have overpaid for generation service. Because at the end of the contract, one of a couple variables might happen. They miss the letters that came in, they forget about them, they don't pay attention. And I know, look, I personally believe in personal responsibility. So people are going to shop, they should pay attention to these things, right? But the reality on the ground is, the proof is in the numbers. $400 million more than they should have been paying for generation service had they stayed with their utility. So, as I said in my testimony, again, this is a simple fix, and quite frankly, having customers return to default service automatically is actually, in my view, a benefit for the competitive market. Because, as I said, and I spent 20 years in the service industry before I went to law school and got this position, and I can tell you that most people know, consumers that are going to buy something, whether it's a product or a service, and they get burned, are going to tell like up to 10 people about this bad experience that they've had. People that have a good experience, on the other hand, might tell 2 other people, maybe. This is national research, well established. So again, is it any wonder that shopping statistics continue to languish at this 20% mark? If consumers automatically return to default service and they weren't facing these severe, harsh penalties at the end of a contract that they've simply overlooked, they'd return to the default service of the utility. And that price will certainly be a little bit higher. And they're going to notice that in the first bill that comes back. And maybe that's going to bring them back to remembering, I had a good deal with generation when I shopped for it. Maybe I should go back and do that again. But I can tell you overwhelmingly, and I saw heads nod in this crowd when I said this, overwhelmingly, when I talk to people across the state, they say the same thing. I shopped, I did that once, and I'm never going to do it again because I got burned.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Chairman Metzger.
Mr. Lawrence, Mr. Tubbs, you both spent a tremendous amount of your testimony time talking about those who shop for their electricity and how it is so dangerous for them to do that. And you talked about how they pay more. But I know that you two do your jobs very well, and you know that people shop for their electricity not just based on price, but sometimes based on product. And that one of the most popular products that they have is the, for instance, solar days, free nights, which is an invariably higher price product. So you're hanging your arguments based on price, but price isn't the only thing that consumers choose to make deals on. And so that being said, it calls into question some of the veracity of the rest of your testimony from my standpoint, because I'm confused as to why you would base it just on price. And then the second component of your argument is that you demand that the solution be this ultra-paternalistic view that consumers should have to go back to what is a monopolistic and guaranteed rate of return entity in the event that something changes in their contract. And so I guess I won't talk about the equal fallibility of some of those monopolies and how they've made some errors as well. And there's always bad actors in anything, but it makes me question some of the things that you're saying because you're characterizing them in such a way. And I just think that making it such that you think Pennsylvanians are so dim or inexperienced that they need such controls in a market like this where we want them to have that competition seems wrong to me. And, I point to some recent surveys of Maryland where they're begging to get that competitive market back because it's not there. So you guys just confused me, but my question is for Mr. Hawk, actually.
Okay.
Mr. Hawk.
Yes, sir.
Chairman
were-
Metzger, may I suggest that we allow Mr. Lawrence to reply?
They've had many minutes of testimony. I was simply replying to their testimony. But Mr. Hawk, I have a question for you. You were a little bit cavalier with saying that PJM isn't the problem. But I think Chairman Causer pointed out correctly that PJM is part of the problem. For many years, 13 member states and all of the other members have made decisions that have put us in the position that we're in right now. And we do have concerns in Pennsylvania about why Pennsylvania is the historic, generator in the PJM network and the exporter of electricity. Why should we be giving our energy to PJM and then getting it back from PJM in a roundabout way whenever we, in a utopian world, could have the cheapest energy in the country and attract all of the manufacturing business back that's a large consumer of it, and then perhaps sell what excess we have to PJM and move on with our lives? Wouldn't that be better for the Pennsylvania consumer? And so, yes, we are looking at a way to exit in full or in part something out of PJM, because PJM is part of the problem.
Yeah, and thank you for the question. So let me begin with my response to Chair Fiedler was really about the generation interconnection queue and sort of the backlog associated with that. And I wanted to just make that sort of very crystal clear that, right now, if you are a supply project and you want to interconnect into the grid, you are not in some sort of holding pattern. We will process you in 1 to 2 years. So that was what that concept was relating to. As far as Pennsylvania, again, this idea of going it alone. So I think it takes some historical context. So the generators that exist in the state of Pennsylvania, many of them were developed with the open market that was created and were not paid for on the backs of PA consumers. So they were developed as a result of the larger marketplace that exists in Pennsylvania, as well as Ohio, as well as Illinois, as well as Jersey, Maryland, et cetera. And so you begin with sort of that premise that the marketplace did create an environment that allowed for the construction of a lot of generation. We were long supply for a number of years, and I think a confluence of a few things has created, and most specifically, this massive uptick in demand as a result of data centers has created, the shortage situation that you're experiencing today. Now, that marketplace has been, excellent for Pennsylvania consumers. Power has been relatively, because we were long supply, relatively cheap on the wholesale side for a number of years, and now we're seeing, again, the supply-demand, we'll just characterize it as imbalance, creating higher prices. So I think that the marketplace has definitely inured to the benefit of the state of Pennsylvania from both a cost perspective as well as the ability to create these generators in the state. Demand, one of the primary states where we're seeing an uptick in demand. Got a regulated jurisdiction like Virginia. Certainly Pennsylvania is attracting a lot of data centers as well. And so I do think that there is a balance here of trying to figure out, okay, long term, what is the right decision or the right dynamic for the state, and will we always be positioned exactly where we are positioned today on a going forward basis, especially with the attraction of all the data centers that are the state is attempting to attract. And so, I There are options on the table. If Pennsylvania were desirous to advance those options, we're happy to sit with you and talk through what those conceivable options are.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll proceed to members' questions. But first, Mr. Lawrence, I'd like to give you just 1 minute to respond and clarify. It's important to me that the record is clear. My understanding was that your proposal would actually increase choice and give more power to consumers to decide. But I'd like to give you just 60 seconds to make sure your testimony is clear, please.
Sure, and I'd certainly love to respond to your question, Chair Metzger. There are certainly generation customers that are shopping in Pennsylvania that are looking to buy like 100% solar, 100% wind, and they're willing to pay a premium for that. And I appreciate that. And frankly, that is probably the only reason why I'm not recommending to this committee that residential shopping for all customers in Pennsylvania be ended, period. So I'm not strictly relying my comments on price. So I understand that there are customers that are willing to pay more. They affirmatively have made that choice, and that's fine.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Next, we'll go to members' questions. Representative Boyd will start us off.
Thank you, Chair Fiedler. My question is on this issue, actually, because I would like to see something of like what you're recommending. I'm confused. I'd like to know, though, Mr. Tubbs, I think it was, how are retail providers able to enter this competitive market and still charge the customers more for their same product? I ask that because, and I'll be really super honest with this room, I just got my electric bill, and last year my gas and electric last month was $660 for my 1,400 square foot house. This month I just got it was $860. I have a 1,400 square foot house, 3-bedroom, 1 bath in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. My community, when I can't pay that, my community can't pay that. I do want to see ways that people can access lower rates. So how can retail providers enter into that competitive market and still then change on customers for the same product?
Well, I think the consumer advocate did a nice job sort of articulating what's happening. I think what we're seeing is, the electric generation supply is deregulated in the state. It's restructured, so it's competitive. Your utilities are not providing your generation, but it is being provided, or you have the ability to go out and shop for it. And if you don't choose, because choosing, not to choose is a choice, then you are provided default service through a process that is approved by the commission and rates that are set by the commission, but again, don't result in any profit for the utilities. I think what we're seeing, and I think what the consumer advocate indicated, is you're seeing some offers that come in low and that are short-term in nature. I will tell you that we had utilities that have seen that some of these offerings are targeted to zip codes that have a large number of customers that are just beyond our low-income programs. So it's sort of looking to get consumers. It could be an offering of a gift card. It could be offering of a gas card. And these things can result in customers looking, and they can get a benefit from it. And as long as they pay attention, it's a participatory sport. Like if you're going to shop, you need to engage. And if you engage, you can save. It's really incumbent upon the consumer to do so. I think what the consumer advocate's getting at is when you have prices that come in low and then it comes to an end at a fixed contract, is that shifting rate onto a variable contract, which could be significantly higher depending on the timing, is where we're starting to see problems where consumers don't realize that they rolled over to a variable contract and they sort of continue. So it could be low for a moment, then sky high next month. It's sort of making sure that doesn't happen to consumers because of inattentiveness.
Thank you for your response. Thank you, Representative, for the question. Next, we'll go to Representative Craig Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hawk, I'd like to direct this to you. Just this last Friday, I was at the Maryland House of Delegates dealing with this very same issue, and my questions were directed to PJM there, and I'd like to follow up on that today. In Maryland, and I'm only going to deal with the first capacity auction because it was the most dramatic one. The capacity auction is entirely about tomorrow's electricity needs being here today by way of a market. And we know it's here, right? The entire answer is about how are we going to make more electricity to meet tomorrow's demand. That's what the capacity market's about. In Maryland, they decided to drive off generation and sit on the virtue throne of clean energy, and now they're importing 40% of their electricity ostensibly from us while burning our natural gas. As a consequence, their capacity auction went up 1,500%. Ours went up 800%. Now, the result of the rate cap was we never realized those costs, but we did realize a substantial increase, which is why on an 11-degree day back home in Delaware County, we're seeing, I just came from a Saturday event to corroborate your observation. I asked the room, what are your electricity prices? They said $700, $800, and $1,200. That's insane. So we have to be exploring new ways to do our market in Pennsylvania. Data centers are here. The need for electricity is here. We need to make it in Pennsylvania and reap those benefits. The governor's social media team, for multi-millions of dollars, says PJM was planning to jack up energy prices for Pennsylvanians, and I took action, saving billions in energy costs. It was not a reduction of billions in energy costs. It was the avoidance of a much larger bill. And the price collar now means Pennsylvania goes up to everyone else, and they come down to us. Your bills are going up again. So my question, consistent with other questions that you've been asked today, is a little more pointed.
Sure.
If we are going to make electricity in Pennsylvania, and we are going to be net exporters of our electricity, how can Pennsylvania ratepayers in Delaware County and the other 66 counties benefit first?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the first thing that I would say is, again, there is this fixed resource requirement option, and that is embedded currently in the PJM tariff, and that is an option that can be taken. You'd have to figure out what your generators in the state would need to be compensated going forward, and how that benchmarks against the existing auction framework. So that's the sort of existing dynamic that's in play. Now, going forward, we need a lot more supply. We need a lot more supply in order to meet this demand. I think Pennsylvania is very well situated to attract that supply, whether it's through an existing markets framework or other. What the PJM board recently decided on Friday was that it was going to initiate this backstop procurement framework. And I'm just thinking through, okay, so if we're going to initiate this backstop procurement framework, the states that have a combination of a regime where you are welcoming to generation resources, cite them and permit them quickly, have shown a track record for wanting to attract those generators, that is ultimately going to be a good opportunity to have more supply developed out in this state. The one other facet, and this is also responding to Representative Metzger as well, is that these generating plants that are in the state, they have, there are certainly benefits to being part of a state that has a significant surplus to those communities. I used to be a lawyer for a small manufacturer in Ohio, and the manufacturer's impact on local communities and the tax base and those who worked at those units it's very substantial. And so if the question is purely around, pricing, okay, if we're purely talking about affordability, we need a lot more supply. Okay, if then the question is, what if we have, a lot more supply? How do we benefit first? The response right now is to look at that tariff opportunity, which is that fixed resource requirement opportunity, because you are long and that is an option that's available to you.
And just to clarify that, if we look at that tariff opportunity and we decide that Pennsylvanians benefit first by way of cheapest prices and the other states pay pay their escalated price for their bad energy policies? That's something we could accomplish right now.
You would be able to set through your state commission pricing for capacity, which would conceivably be different than what other states are paying.
I am interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to 2 more questions from members, and then we will move on to panel 2. Apologies to folks who didn't get their questions in, but hope you will have a question for panel 2. We will go to Representative Borowski.
Thank you, Chair Fiedler. And thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. Very much appreciated, and certainly appreciate all of the insight regarding the retail aspect of power generation here in our Commonwealth. I feel like many times it is misleading and disingenuous, and I think that we need to do a better job for our for our customers and consumers here in the state. But my question is going to be for Chairman DeFrank, and I appreciate all of you coming with solutions as well, solutions for the legislature, things that we can think of and that we can consider. And one thing I hadn't considered, and having been a township commissioner before coming into this role, the municipal restoration. And Chairman DeFrank, you talked about that. You talked about how the changes in that are also impacting cost. So I want to just understand that, because I can tell you that is probably one of the biggest rubs as a local elected, when we have PICO out doing work on our local roads, and then people wanting not the inconvenience for sure, and wanting the roads restored, the township wanting the roads restored to a certain level, because we still need to plow those roads and we need to make sure that they're good and they're in good shape. So can you talk a little bit about that and what that might look like? Because from your testimony, it seemed to me we wanted to push that back, maybe that cost back onto the municipalities, and I just want to clarify that.
No, I'm not suggesting we push it back to municipalities. I'm suggesting that we stick to PennDOT standards. So PennDOT standard for a road cut, when you resurface it, you got to go 1.5 foot out on each side of the cut. A lot of municipalities require utilities only to go 4 feet out from the cut. That adds to cost. Ratepayers end up paying that cost. It's pretty straightforward. There was also a case, my home township, Manila Township in Fayette County, with exorbitant fees. So I believe it was
Columbia Gas.
Andy knows more about this, but Columbia Gas, I don't know what the fee was, but they charged thousands of dollars for a permit fee just for a utility. They recently lost that case. The township lost that case, and Columbia won that, or we won that recently. They were suing us.
Yeah, I would just real quick, I know we're running out of time, but I think it is, I didn't bring it up in my testimony because there are so many big issues, but it is a really important issue. And restoration costs for the natural gas utilities and the water utilities is a big deal. And I think honestly, you have to be a little understanding, right? If you're looking at a Columbia Gas, it serves in 26 counties, 450 different communities. That's 450 different rules that they have to abide by. And those rules change by township meetings or local municipality meetings. And the chairman is correct. Sometimes what we're seeing is it's not trying to push it on to. We actually want to work with the local communities to do the paving and do it together. I think it's really important that the water companies and the gas utilities work together to coordinate their timing of projects to kind of to mitigate. No, it's important. I agree with you.
That would be amazing.
But I think when we do projects and you're doing a cut that's 4 feet on either side of a hole, but then the township comes back and says we want you to pave curb to curb 200 feet either side of that hole, that's part of the road that was never impacted at all. And I will say that the employees that are doing this work are often located in the communities in which they live. So these aren't people coming in out of state to do work in your communities. They live there. So they drive the same roads. So when you're concerned about the road and ability to plow and it not being rough to drive on during the summer and winter, they had the same concern. So I'm happy to talk to you about this some more.
Thank you. And final question for panel 1 will come from Representative Mahaffey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not sure who asked this, but you said data centers should pay their own way. Is that paying their own way as far as generation, or is that paying their own way as distribution? Because my concern in this is, if they're guaranteed and they're going to pay their own way and they're going to get what they think they're getting by paying their own way. If they don't get that, we're just chasing them to another state, to relocate. Now, that's a loss of jobs, really good jobs, and these build-outs and so forth, if they're done correctly, we want to make sure that our local municipalities are doing all the right things. But at that point, and then it goes to Mr. Hawk, if we locate them in Ohio, we're still going to be affected by higher rates. So it isn't helping us in either way. So that's more my question right there is, if we're asking them to pay their own way, how are we asking them to pay their own way?
Certainly, and that's a very fair question. We can't be draconian about forcing data centers to pay every cost that they may possibly create, right? Because exactly what will happen is we will chase them to other states. They will seek other opportunities because it's a competitive marketplace right now. But what we're hearing as far as these contracts and how they should play out and how they're actually playing out in the ground are two different things, right? In my view, I think Pennsylvania residents as a whole should not be held harmless, but should actually see a net benefit from the introduction of data centers. And contracts and agreements can be structured so that happens. But when you're talking about building, for example, a $200 million transmission infrastructure solely to connect a data center, right? The entirety of that infrastructure, in my view, should be paid for by the data center. And the data center developers largely do not disagree with us. What they're interested in is speed, right? Yeah. They have the capital. They want to get connected to the grid and do it as quickly as possible. And that's fine. And I would also raise another point that we haven't talked about as far as data centers and the demand and supply inverse curve that's going on right now and what's happening. Look, there's more ways to fuel these data centers than simply connecting them to the grid or waiting for a combined cycle gas plant to be built. It's going to take years and years, and especially because of the supply chain problems right now. There are companies out there right now, existing technology, that are using, for example, natural gas-fired fuel cells that will take natural gas, convert it to electricity without actually burning the natural gas. Now, it still does create CO2, but those technologies are available and they're scalable and they're available like right now, today. So do we need to wait years and years to build a combined cycle gas plant in the right place when these data centers, frankly, if they want to connect to the grid quickly, they can bring their own generation in a variety of ways, but that's one way that they can do it.
Well, and I'm going to go, and thank you for your answer on that, and thank you, gentlemen, for everything that's happened. And I think no one here, as far as everybody knows who I am, and as far as what is going on at 3 Mile Island and Crane Clean Energy Center, and entering in with a power purchasing agreement with Microsoft, and Microsoft said they want to support their, well, this is their way of supporting their own, right? Their data centers, but they're going in front of the meter, right? So there's some things going on now behind the meter, in front of the meter, and all the things that are going on, and that goes down to PJM and how you guys are going to handle that and what's going to go on. Because here's the point. The point is, to pay the electric bill, you want to raise, because the cost of inflationary products and whatever it is, and everybody wants a higher pay, which is, we're chasing. We keep continually chasing. And as that goes up, everything else goes up, and now we enter into an inflation problem. The reason I say this and where we're going with this, other states, this whole race for AI is not just global, it's 50 states. And who's going to enter and who's going to get this data center and who's going to get this generation and what's going on. And this state continuously sits here and does nothing about it. We need to incentivize. We need to look at ways to bring generation here, whatever it is, whether it's nuke, whether it's gas, whether it's coal, whether it's renewables, whatever that is, it's going to help this grid lower our cost, the supply and demand side, and make that happen. But we still don't do that. Now, this is where I was. PJM, I asked you this question about 2 years ago. Why are you not, and today you did, so I'll give you that, but why is PJM not coming to this General Assembly and saying, we need to fix this and we need to fix this now? And this should have been done years ago. You know what I mean? You guys said that 3 Mile Island closing was not going to be a problem. Well, it's a problem because we need generation. You said looking at things 4 or 5 years down the road and seeing that these are problems that are going to occur. How far do you forecast? Because that was only 5 years ago. You didn't see data centers coming 5 years ago, or the influx of electricity coming 5 years ago. So they're the things that we need to know, because we can't do anything in here in this building without knowing from you, the regulators, and you, the producers of electricity, and you and everybody else that's involved in this. This is a major problem right now, and I don't think the right hand is knowing what the left hand is doing, and vice versa. And we can't put policy in place, good policy in place, without having you guys tell us what to do.
Yeah. So to your first question about the costs and then creating cost competitive issues between states. So we navigate on the wholesale side of costs and the state on the retail. So anything that we do would end up being universally applicable across the states. The big question from the combination of what the board decided on Friday and what the Trump administration and the 13 governors decided, they want this reliability backstop procurement run, is who pays for the resources that end up being procured. We need to unpack some of the sort of legal jurisdictional components of that, because again, we don't deal in customer classes. PJM is not sitting around saying residential class will pay X, industrial class will pay Y, data center class will pay Z. We send costs to a region, and those costs then get allocated pursuant to what the state decides. So that's sort of first thing to think about. Second thing is, look, 3 Mile Island's closure. I wasn't at PJM when 3 Mile Island closed, but I think a phenomenon that I think we have to be totally honest with one another that no one could see was this data center growth, and just how much power that these data centers could conceivably consume, specifically hyperscalers, 80,000 homes, one hyperscaler. I think the scale of that and how quickly it advanced, I think, was very difficult to predict from either our lens or from others' lenses as well. But we're here now, and we would love to continue to engage on trying to solve the supply-demand challenge, because it's a generational challenge in the industry.
I don't disagree, but there's 20 other states being extremely competitive in that market with the nuclear energy market. And I think it's in anything. I mean, we're sitting on the largest gas vein that we could ever, imagine in the world, and we're not utilizing that either. So, I mean, there are things that we need to do, that we, as a General Assembly, to move quickly. But as you said, it takes 4 or 5 years. Are we out? Like, is data going to be built out before generation is going to get here?
Data centers it takes a data center much less time to build out than, say, we'll just characterize it as a new natural gas plant. Takes them much less time. And so you're going to have this period here where, even if the financial incentives are right and you can invest in new supply, you're going to have a period here where you're going to continue to see a dwindling of the reserve margin in PJM, and that'll be, writ large for those states that have. Virginia used to be a state that was long power, okay, and now it's short. And PA, you're long now, but the more data centers you bring to the state, that may not always be the case, which is why it's good to have a regional marketplace to rely upon. So during this interim period, which is why it's important, going back to the decision the PJM board made, our operators in the control room, they are going to have to manage the system with a lot of precision, okay? And so during this period, where you're just going to see increase in demand, and we are trying to bring new supply onto the system, which takes longer than it does to bring demand onto the system, there could be situations where we are going to have to shed load. And specifically, what the board decided was that, hey, in those instances, we're going to figure out how much incremental demand has not been matched by incremental new supply, and we're going to allocate that load shed priority to those zones. So before residential consumers get shed, transmission owner, distribution utility, you got to think about shedding those, not shedding those data centers, but they all have backups. Move to your backups during the most challenging hours, during the most challenging days of the year. I know we're concerned about affordability. We're really concerned about reliability as well. I mean, that is our primary charge. We are concerned about affordability as well because we're a mission-driven organization. Unequivocally, we've got to care about what people are paying for power. But we're really concerned on a day like this, conceivably the lights going out when you hit peak.
And I think that's a perfect place to end our panel. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Thank you to all of our guests on panel 1. We will now switch to panel 2. Thank you again for joining us and your time and testimony. All right. Thank you all. We're going to move on to panel 2 now. Apologies for the gavel. Thank you all for being here. I know everyone has a busy day and want to be respectful of your time. Great. Thank you all for being here on panel 2. for this joint hearing of the Consumer and Energy Committees. In our second panel, we have Elizabeth Marks, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, Mark Ellis, Senior Fellow for Utilities at the American Economic Liberties Project, and Christina Montgomery, Senior Director for State and Regional Policy Engagement at Vistra Corp. Ms. Marks, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, chairs, members, fellow Pennsylvanians. Can you all hear me? Am I speaking close enough too? Okay.
Make sure the green light is on and make sure the microphone is physically close to your mouth.
Physically close. Okay,
Yes.
I'll try not to
Wonderful.
eat it. My name is Elizabeth Marks. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. We're a statewide legal aid program, and we represent low-income Pennsylvanians and consumer groups across the state who are struggling to keep the lights on and the heat running in their homes. The clients we serve are really facing the most profound impacts of increasing energy costs, and I'm here today on their behalf. I prepared pretty extensive written testimony, and for everybody's benefit, I don't plan to read it. I will outline an attempt to outline some of the nuanced impacts, drivers, and solutions, and I will try to draw your attention to various data pieces, which I think are really important for you and your staffs to take a closer look at after this hearing is over, and stand available to assist with any members of the committees as we move forward. But, you heard it from Representative Gallagher at the top. Energy is not a luxury. It's an essential to modern life. Pennsylvanians need energy to heat and cool their homes, power medical devices, cook food, connect with employers, schools, and loved ones. Yet, I will say quite literally, an increasing number of families across Pennsylvania are being priced out of the market for basic energy needs. In 2025, over 387,000 Pennsylvania households had their electric or gas shut off. This does not include all the households that rely on deliverable fuel and couldn't afford a delivery this winter. Since 2023, we've hit a new record for terminations every year, surpassing the prior record during the Great Recession. You can see this alarming trend if you turn to the data on pages 5 through 7 of my testimony. At this point, well over 1.2 million Pennsylvanians are paying over 10% of their income on home energy costs alone. In 2024, 1 in 4 Pennsylvanians reported difficulty paying their energy bill, and among families earning under $50,000 a year, over half reduce the amount of food or medicine that their family receives in order to pay an energy bill. Of course, the greatest increase in energy insecurity was among families with children. Utility shutoffs make people and communities unhealthy and unsafe, creating short and long-term health consequences, exacerbating housing and economic insecurity, and compounding costs for both families and communities. The very existence of utility debt, it's worth noting, will make a household ineligible for both public and private housing options, and it is the leading cause or indicator, utility debt, of first-time homelessness. While not a primary driver, it's important to note that Pennsylvania's current framework for utility collections is exacerbating the affordability crisis. In 2004, the General Assembly passed Chapter 14, allowing utilities greater discretion to implement what my office would consider punitive collections policies while constraining the Commission's ability to intervene. The law incentivized terminations and compounded debt, yet failed to meaningfully reduce collections costs. Chapter 14 sunset in December 2024, offering a distinct opportunity to design a new prevention-based paradigm to help mitigate rising costs before debts accrue. I know this is something that many of my colleagues agree with, because I heard that throughout the panel earlier. So I'll turn to the key drivers, and again, I'll try to summarize my summary. But you heard from the prior panel about wild capacity costs driving up generation rates. I'll turn your attention to page 10 of my written testimony so that you can see what exactly is happening. We've got average residential heating customers paying as much as $58 more per month, year over year. We estimate that residential customers at Pennsylvania's largest electric utilities will pay $78 million more per month just because of the capacity auctions. This is approaching $1 billion over the next year, just at the 4 largest electric utilities. You heard earlier today just kind of pieces of this, but the increase in generation rates has also added over $57 million annually to the cost of universal service programs without helping a single additional family. Universal service costs in Pennsylvania, unlike our surrounding states, are currently only allocated to residential customers, which means that data centers don't pay a dime to support the programs or pay for the costs that they're causing to increase. This massive shift that we're all talking about on the generation side is really just the tip of the iceberg. And as data centers are built, distribution and transmission costs will also continue to rise. Second, and this was an issue of great debate throughout the first panel. But I want to know.
I think it's
Okay, so Pennsylvanians, now that I have everybody's attention, Pennsylvanians are losing money in the competitive market. I turn your attention to page 15, where we've compiled data that we obtained through years of litigation, and it shows that across the 4 major electric utilities, residential shopping customers paid $2.2 billion more than the price to compare. That is with a B, that is billion. Add to that the $400 million that my colleague Andy Tubbs cited for last year alone, and we are approaching $3 billion just since 2015 that is paying more than the price to compare. I want to just reference, there was some discussion of green offers, and I'll say that there was a recent study that looked at green offers and whether or not the price, the higher price was due to markup or was due to the actual price of energy. And they found that no, it was actually markup. There is a lot of greenwashing going on and confusing offers in the competitive market that must be shifted. I'll also note, and I could tell you stories all day long about the clients we serve each and every day that are paying higher prices that did not make an affirmative choice. It was not an affirmative choice of the 90-year-old veteran on hospice that we helped get out of a product that he switched from his hospice bed that was close to 3 times the default service rate. In our estimation, it is time to evaluate Pennsylvania's retail competitive markets. Third, I'll note briefly, though it goes into depth in my testimony, that the rapid growth of gas exports since 2016 is forcing Pennsylvanians to compete in the world market for gas. This growth is illustrated if you turn to page 20 in my testimony. And since 60% of Pennsylvania's electricity is generated by gas, rising gas prices don't just affect Pennsylvania gas bills, they drive up electricity costs too. I will say that this serves as a caution when we talk about solutions that double down on the amount of gas that we are using for generation costs. We saw the consequences of export growth in late 2022 when gas prices spiked here at home after Russia cut off Europe's gas supply. Thereafter, residential gas terminations increased 40% year over year for residential households, and electricity terminations followed suit. Instability in world energy markets will continue to translate into instability in gas rates here at home. I'll just note the charts on pages 23 and 24, and you'll see that export capacity is expected to double by 2027. Coupled with anticipated increases in gas demands to power data centers, EIA, just last week, is now projecting that gas prices will increase another 33% by 2027. Fourth, gas infrastructure costs. When gas prices dropped because we started drilling in the Marcellus Shale, gas utilities implemented aggressive distribution, expansion, and replacement programs, which mask the true costs of while commodity prices are low. But now that those costs are increasing, the added infrastructure costs are already baked in, and these are long-term costs. Fifth, driver excessive utility profits. I'm just going to defer to my colleague, Mark Ellis, who will talk a lot about it, though I want to note, Chairman DeFrank noted during his panel that utilities, the timeline is tight, but I'll also say that we pay for rate case expenses through rates. We need to look at that. My colleague Darrell Lawrence also highlighted that utilities are advancing alternative rate mechanisms which shift normal business risks from utilities to consumers, also an area that I urge you to look into. The solutions are multifaceted issues, but must be bold and comprehensive. And I'll say, an elephant in this room is that energy is a $1 trillion industry, and there are a lot of lobbyists behind it. This makes it very difficult to move meaningful policy solutions and rebalance broken scales. But to be successful, we need everybody in this room to have a powerful backbone. I'm going to just note a couple of solutions which are detailed in my testimony. On data centers, I'll say there is no due burden for residential ratepayers that are already bearing overburdensome costs. To help prevent socialization of data center costs, we're urging adoption of a strong legal presumption, a but-for presumption that my colleague Darrell Lawrence spoke about. Absent actual, substantial, and quantifiable evidence to the contrary, distribution upgrades for data centers should be viewed as benefiting the data center. Second, require data centers to pay the universal service costs that they're causing. Third, impose other critical consumer protections, standardizing service terms, public disclosure, demand response requirements, mandatory load shedding, and requirements that data centers build and bring their own renewable energy sources to help alleviate the strain on gas supply. On retail markets, the clearest solution after years of excessive prices, in our estimation and our experience, is to close the residential retail energy markets. Residential customers would still benefit from competitive wholesale markets through default service, and large industrial customers could retain their direct market access. But at a minimum, the legislature should require suppliers to return customers to default service at the end of the contract, absent express and affirmative consent to the renewal. Prohibit variable rates, and eliminate purchase of receivables programs that hold suppliers harmless for excessive rates. Fourth, restore PUC authority to issue direct customer refunds when suppliers are bad actors. On billing and collections, advance prevention-based reforms, require improved screening and enrollment and assistance programs, helping families before they fall behind, and require utilities to issue realistic and affordable payment arrangements, restoring PUC discretion to review those facts and circumstances. And last, eliminate punitive fees that only compound unaffordable debt. On termination protections, strengthen the protections available for medically vulnerable households and protect them from shut-off during the hottest summer months. On rate reform, again, I'll defer to Mark Ellis. I know he's going to speak about this in a moment, but we need guardrails to tie utility profits to actual market costs rather than inflated returns currently authorized. We also need to remove utility rate expenses and lobbying costs from rates and prohibit alternative mechanisms that shift costs to consumers. Finally, we urge you to streamline and integrate the confusing patchwork of energy efficiency, weatherization, and home repair programs. And we also strongly encourage allocation of state funds to support year-round operation of the low-income home assistance programs. I'll say in closing, the data is really clear. The solutions do exist, and what's needed now is political will to get it done. I'm happy to work with each and every one of you, and I look forward to the dialogue.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ellis, I think it's working. Technology's working. I hope. That sounds great. You may go ahead. Thank you.
Sorry. Chairs and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. If we could start with the title slide, please. Go back one. Okay. My name is Mark Ellis. I'm a testifying expert in finance and economics and utility regulatory proceedings on behalf of consumer environmental advocates. I'm also a senior fellow at the American Economic Liberties Project, where I focus on utility structural reform. Previously, I spent nearly 30 years inside the utility industry, 15 as chief economist and head of corporate strategy at Sempra, one of the largest U.S. utility holding companies. I was responsible for the enterprise-wide cost of capital, and I saw firsthand how return on equity, the profit rate regulators allow utilities to earn on shareholder capital, drives corporate strategy, investment decisions, and regulatory and policy advocacy across the industry. That experience is why I want to focus today on a single question that goes directly to this committee's charge: how regulators set that profit rate, ROE, and how that choice shapes utility behavior, systematically inflates customer costs, and can be changed by the General Assembly to address energy affordability in Pennsylvania. Please advance. Regulators have three core responsibilities. They decide how much utilities are allowed to spend, how much profit utilities are allowed to earn, and how those costs and profits are allocated among customers. Two of these are really hard. Spending suffers from deep information and resource asymmetries. Cost allocation is inherently political. Profit is different. Return on equity has a clear legal standard, well-developed financial theory and models, and observable market feedback. If regulation should work anywhere, it's here. Please advance. Under traditional cost of service regulation, utilities are allowed to recover their costs and earn a return on investment equal to their market-based cost of capital. In principle, this balances investor and consumer interests. Advance, please. In practice, authorized ROEs substantially exceed what investors actually require. Authorized ROEs are nearly 4% higher than independent return benchmarks for the market as a whole. Utilities are lower risk than the market, so their returns should be lower still. Next slide. Please. Yeah. Stock prices tell the same story. If ROEs track the cost of equity, utility stocks would trade near the actual net cost of their assets. Persistent price-to-book premiums signal that investors expect ROEs far above the cost of capital. Current price-to-book ratios imply an aggregate excess ROE customer overcharge of $60 billion a year nationwide, about $450 per household. That's not total utility profit. That's profit in excess of the just and reasonable legal standard. Excess ROEs matter for two reasons. First, they raise customer bills directly, increasing the profit collected on every dollar of rate base. This ROE effect is immediate, mechanical, and recurring. Second, they distort incentives. Because profits scale with capital, utilities are encouraged to grow rate base rather than minimize costs. The more ROE exceeds the cost of equity, the stronger this CapEx bias becomes. Together, these effects, oh, sorry, I forgot to advance the slide. Let's go back, just to give you a moment to read it. Sorry, that one, yeah. Together, these effects compound. Excess ROEs increase both the profit rate and the amount of capital earning that profit, driving excessive long-term bill growth. Next slide. Pennsylvania's ROEs sit at the very top of the national distribution, the extreme case of a nationwide problem and a flashing warning sign for this legislature. The benchmark is not that national average, it's the market-based cost of equity. In Pennsylvania, the ROE effect alone costs gas and electric utility customers roughly $2 billion a year. This is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing transfer of wealth from customers to shareholders year after year and growing. Next slide. Why is this happening? Not because the law is unclear, not because finance theory is flawed. Former FERC Administrative Law Judge Scott Hempling has observed that regulatory breakdown stems from regulators' attitudes and behaviors. In practice, this takes form as a pattern of routine choices about process, methods, and professional norms that leave regulators ill-equipped to rigorously scrutinize utility proposals, analyses, and assumptions. Next slide. For example, in Pennsylvania, more than 90% of rate cases are resolved through settlement. Settlement can be efficient, but when it becomes the norm, core regulatory judgments like ROE often go unexamined and unjustified. Next slide. Similarly, the Commission relies on an ROE benchmarking process that is widely acknowledged, even by utilities themselves, to be unrealistic and biased upward. My purpose here is not to explain the model. Its continued authoritative use is itself the point. A process that appears rigorous but actually reflects an institutionalized lack of curiosity about its assumptions and results, and therefore fails to discipline outcomes. Next slide. The professional environment regulators choose to inhabit reinforces this passive and curious mindset. Industry influence over regulators, both financial and institutional, is explicit and overt. Regulators are not required to participate in these arrangements. This choice predictably weakens independence and normalizes industry perspectives within regulatory judgment. Next slide. Fortunately, foundational regulatory principles point us to a solution. Regulation exists as a surrogate for competition, used only where competition is not feasible. Where competition can be introduced directly, it should replace administrative judgment altogether. Utilities already rely on competitive processes to procure fuel, equipment, and debt. There's no principled or practical reason equity should be treated differently. Next slide. Transparent, standardized market for utility operating company equity, where investors compete on the return they are willing to accept rather than on the price they are willing to pay for a regulator-set return, would align ROE with the market cost of equity, lowering customer costs while strengthening utilities' ability to attract stable long-term capital. I'll close with 4 basic truths. Evidence of excess ROEs is unambiguous. Excess ROEs violate the just and reasonable rate-making standard. Regulation exists to mimic markets, not override them. Markets can price utility equity transparently. Excess ROE is a choice. Regulators make it, and customers pay for it every year. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you very much. Thanks for working through so much material so quickly. We appreciate it. Ms. Montgomery, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, chairs, members of the committees, for the invitation to provide comments today. My name is Christina Montgomery, and I'm the Senior Director of State and Regional Policy Engagement for Vistra Corp., and I'm happy to be here today. Vistra Corp. Is a competitive power generator and retailer. We're actually one of the largest competitive power generators in the U.S. In our portfolio, we have 44 gigawatts of generation, which is a diversified fleet, including natural gas, nuclear, coal, solar, and battery storage. We also serve 5 million residential and business customers through our portfolio of retail brands. Here in the Commonwealth, we have 6 plants with more than 5,200 megawatts of generating capacity, and we employ over 700 people. A little bit of history on our company. The name Vistra comes from the combination of 2 words, vision and tradition. We have a long tradition of providing reliable, safe, and affordable power to our customers. We also have a vision that competitive markets and innovation will help to meet the moment and the challenge at hand. We agree that the energy space is changing rapidly, and so too is our company. In the last 2 years, we have added 3,400 megawatts of generating capacity to our portfolio in Pennsylvania, which includes the Beaver Valley Nuclear Power Station in western Pennsylvania. We also just announced the addition of 2 more gas plants through our acquisition of Cogentrix. Most recently, we announced that we are pursuing uprates at our nuclear plants in Pennsylvania and Ohio, which will provide 433 megawatts of reliable zero-carbon electricity to the grid. 140 of those megawatts will be at Beaver Valley. And as part of that process, we will be able to pursue relicensing of those plants, meaning that they will be able to provide reliable power for an additional 20 years into the 2050s and 60s. So you've already heard a lot about what's happening with electricity bills, and my written comments go into more detail. I'm going to focus my comments here today on our policy recommendations. So first, in the near term, we acknowledge that we are in challenging times. We serve 5 million customers. We are well aware of the impact rising electricity prices have on families and businesses, and we are looking for opportunities to help. We must educate consumers on their options. Pennsylvanians have a choice when it comes to who provides their energy supply. And right now, there are offers available in the market that will save consumers money. Policymakers, companies, industry organizations, we should all be educating customers on how to exercise their option and what to do at the end of their contract. We should all be promoting Pennsylvania shopping websites, which provide unbiased information on the retail market. We also must ensure that all consumers understand the resources that are available to them if they are struggling to pay their bills. We all know that the number receiving assistance through customer assistance programs is far lower than the number of customers who are actually eligible. To help our customers, Vistra recently expanded our energy aid program to Pennsylvania. This is a voluntary customer assistance program. It's funded by contributions from our employees and our customers, and we have given away over $140 million in assistance through one-time crisis grants. That program is now active in Pennsylvania, and we are working closely with Dollar Energy Fund to get these much-needed dollars out to our customers. Second, I want to focus on the need for transparency. We commend the General Assembly for taking steps to provide much-needed transparency on load forecasting, and this will allow us to have more certainty about the resource adequacy challenge at hand. We also support the Public Utility Commission's efforts to develop a model large load tariff, which provides much-needed certainty to customers, generators, and utilities as they consider long-term infrastructure investments. Before we can provide long-term solutions on affordability, we do need to fully understand the factors driving electric bills. We are hearing a lot about energy and capacity prices today, and rightfully so, as those have increased significantly year over year. But we must acknowledge that there are other factors driving higher bills. Given the outsized attention on energy and capacity, it may surprise some of you to know that these components make up less than half of the average consumer's utility bill. And actually, they make up less of the bill than they did a decade ago. So the question is, what took up that space? Transmission and distribution charges. Now, when the market responds to higher capacity prices, which it has done and which it is doing, capacity prices will come down. But while energy and capacity prices will move up and down based on market dynamics, transmission and distribution rates typically rise and stay higher, and these rates are expected to continue rising. EEI, the Electric Industries Trade Association, has said its members are expected to spend over $1 trillion in capital expenditures from 2025 to 2029. Those dollars have to come from somewhere. We have utilities in Pennsylvania where the transmission component of the bill has increased more than 400% since 2014 for an average customer. Now, we acknowledge there is a balancing act between reliability and affordability. If we go for the cheapest option, there are reliability consequences. But if we try to gold plate the system to ensure reliability, there is also a cost associated with that. Instead of looking at either or, we really need to be asking how we can provide safe and reliable power at a fair cost. On the generation side, we rely on the markets to get this right. We need to support legislative efforts to ensure transparency on what utilities are charging and how those costs are allocated across customer classes. We support efforts to look closer at cost allocation and ensure that utility rates are being set at a level that provide a fair return and that those dollars are being recovered from the right customers. There is an opportunity here, and if handled appropriately, it can drive jobs, tax revenue, and investment. We should not look at load growth as a win-lose. We can balance ratepayer interests with market-driven growth, and we at Vistra are committed to doing so. You will often hear our industry talk about the three-legged stool: reliability, affordability, and sustainability. Reliability ensures confidence, affordability ensures access, and sustainability ensures endurance, and together they define our path forward. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these comments today. Vistra looks forward to being a resource and an ally to help ensure the availability of reliable and affordable power for all customers while driving increased economic development across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll start off with the questions. I'll pose one to Ms. Marks if I could. You said in your testimony that it is impossible to tell at this point how much demand will actually increase. I know that the General Assembly passed a load forecasting measure already. I think it was good that the language from Chair Borges's bill was in the budget. I'd love to know from you, in your opinion, how effective will that be? What more can we be doing? And really, like, what is the risk if we get it wrong on demand?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and unfortunately, I'm going to answer it like an attorney, and that's that, you know, I think we can't be quite certain, right? And it is impossible to tell. And some of it, you know, there's a lot of speculation going on about how much this is. There's still a lot of talk. Is this an AI bubble? Are we going to see data centers? I mean, you even have legitimate folks in the industry talking about sending data centers to space. So are we going to build out data centers and have them available, and then nobody's going to use them because we will have new technology? I have said multiple times in multiple spaces, we can't build the laser disc of today. We got to build the CD before we figure it out. So, you know, I think it was a great step. We have to get load forecasting right because it is causing these severe consequences down the road. And so I think I would encourage you to watch what happens. You know, let's see if the load forecasting improves. I think coupled with that, we need really strong consumer protections for data centers to be paying appropriately sized security deposits. A $200,000 deposit for the build out of one of these massive hyperscale data centers is simply not enough to say, yes, we're actually building here. You know, we need to make real skin in the game to say, yes, I'm coming here, coming to Pennsylvania, I want your land, I want your water, I want your energy, and I'm going to pay up to show it. I mean, we impose security deposits all the time on individuals that far outpace in scale what we are currently asking of data centers to be included in the load forecasting. So step in the right direction, but I think time will tell.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Chairman Causer. Okay. Acting Chairman Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you guys for your testimony today. Ms. Marks, given recent federal budget delays and cuts to assistance programs like LIHEAP, what state-level policies can the General Assembly implement to provide a more stable safety net for 3,000 Pennsylvanians who rely on these funds?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and I do want to, commend my colleagues in the utility space for stepping up to agree not to terminate folks while we experienced a significant LIHEAP delay. I haven't beat up on the utilities, but I do want to recognize where it's due. I think, state level policies that promote early intervention to get rates at an affordable rate is critical. And so in my testimony, I outline a number of those things. We could be doing a far better job of sharing data across agencies to make sure that folks who are eligible for a lower rate are in that rate before they fall behind. It would save ratepayers a ton of money because when you get folks in the right rate, they pay. And we have the data to back it up, right? We have years and years of experience, and you heard from my colleague Andy Tubbs about how much we're investing right now in utility-run assistance programs. Quite frankly, those programs only reach about 20% of the eligible population, and there's a whole population that needs that rate assistance that is just above the eligibility guidelines. The solution is not to look at who we're currently serving and say, that's it, we got to cap this, unless you want to increase homelessness, because the point I made and the data is utility debt is an indicator of first-time homelessness. So if we want to keep people housed and we want to stop the costs that end up coming through the hospital bills and the housing transition, we've got to invest more in our state-run utility assistance programs to reach all that are eligible, to get all that are eligible enrolled. And I think we can do it, but we've got to start holding folks responsible for the costs that they're causing. To my point earlier, $57 million this year in added universal service costs driven by just the change in the capacity markets alone that are coming through our generation bill. So state needs to step up with some investments, for LIHEAP to run that program year round, because we've got other folks, we've got municipal utilities that have no access to the universal service programs that exist for large distribution companies. And so, we do need to improve those state funding for those. We've only given state funds twice in the existence of LIHEAP, once in 1988 and again during the pandemic. So, we are the only cold weather state, I think, that doesn't provide any supplement to the LIHEAP funds. And then I'll just note, consolidating delivery of these programs so that folks have an easier time entering them, and we can cut administration costs. Tons of wasted admin costs because we're duplicating it. We're having each household apply over and over and over again. When they apply once, we know what their income is. So thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman Metzger?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Ms. Marks and Mr. Ellis. It's clear that you've dedicated your lives to trying to make Pennsylvanians' lives better, and we appreciate that from you too. To that end, I guess I know that Vistra has some energy aid programs that they do. Ms. Montgomery, could you tell me a little bit more about that? How is it received by the consumers, and is there anything that we could do as policymakers to try and make sure that gets to the hands of the right people?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. We're very proud of our energy aid program. That assistance, like I said, is voluntary, so it is dollars our customers, our company is putting up to help consumers. We genuinely believe that if we help a customer in their time of need, they are more likely to be one of our customers for the long term. So we take that responsibility very seriously. The Energy Aid program is designed to be a supplement to existing energy assistance programs. So they're one-time crisis grants given to customers who may be facing unexpected household expenses that impact their ability to pay bills. And the goal of that program is to get customers out of the disconnect path. And so it's really to get those dollars, apply them to outstanding utility charges so they do not face disconnection. I think the challenge we have here in Pennsylvania is really getting the word out to customers. We have done some work proactively to communicate, through email with our customers. But the challenge is, we do not have that billing relationship with consumers. And so without that relationship, we do not know who is paying on the due date or who is making partial payments or who is really struggling. And so it really is dependent on us working with the Pennsylvania EDCs. And to that end, we have attempted to partner with utilities who have been very reluctant to help us get those dollars out to consumers. So we look forward to continuing those conversations, but these are dollars we want to get in the hands of customers that need them, and we have more success in states where we have willing participants on the EDC side.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Representative Venkat.
Thank you for your testimony today. My questions are for Ms. Montgomery and Ms. Marks. We are hearing a lot about demand from large load customers, from presumably data centers, and I think all of us agree that there's a fundamental fairness principle here with the idea of user pays, that if they're going to have a high demand, they should be contributing into the system proportionate to that. But the devil is very much in the details, and I think, Ms. Montgomery, you've alluded to this, is that we might be able to mandate related to power generation But this issue of transmission and the infrastructure that goes along with transmission is something that is fixed and used by everyone. And so this actually, I think, also goes to the issue for Mr. Ellis about the return on equity. What, if anything, can we do as a legislature to make sure that the costs that are fixed essentially with transmission are also being borne proportionately by large load customers like data centers? Because otherwise, I don't see how we are shielding ratepayers from the added demand that comes along with this type of circumstance.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I think the way we look at load growth and the way that we should all be looking at load growth is as an opportunity, because if managed appropriately, and that means if we can exercise cost discipline on interconnections, transmission build out, large loads can actually place downward pressure on prices for all customers. And there's Lawrence Berkeley National Labs in Brattle has a study where they look at factors driving electric bills. And what they've seen over the last 5 years, more megawatts on the grid through load can actually decrease prices. And so we have to do this in a responsible manner, which comes to exercising cost discipline. So really a couple of things that the state can do. And there is a lot here that is state jurisdictional. There is a lot here that can happen at the Public Utility Commission. The one thing are the model tariff for large loads. So ensuring that customers who say they want to come to Pennsylvania and set up operations are showing up and are guaranteeing that they are going to pay a portion of the costs incurred to serve them. I think the other thing that is worth taking a look at is cost allocation, which can be done in the context of base rate cases. And what essentially that means is once we figure out the number of dollars that need to be recovered, making sure that those are being allocated appropriately across the customer classes, so residential versus commercial versus large load. So I think there are a lot of tools here. It's going to take a lot of hard work, but we're here and we have a lot of smart people that can look at these and make sure we get it right.
Yeah, I think my colleague hit most of the points. I think there's unfortunately, and what would have heard it referred to as, and I think it's apt, is a donut hole of regulation, right? We've got some costs regulated over at FERC, and they're going to set those formula rates. So one thing is encouraging and providing the resources needed for the Public Utility Commission to be strongly engaging in those spaces where the General Assembly doesn't have jurisdiction, but in setting that, in our recommendations, setting a strong legal presumption that you have to prove the actual and quantifiable evidence that it's benefiting other customers will, at the distribution level cost, help, and it'll help with the allocation of those costs across classes when it comes down to dividing up the pie in the rate proceedings.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answers. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Marks, it's great to see you again. We did some great work together when I was at the utility. I just want to say, like Chairman Metzger did, that you're an absolute champion for the low-income community, as is the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, and I thank you for your work. Keep fighting. My question is for Ms. Montgomery. So I was working in a legislative working group, multi-state across PJM, on comments when we were dealing with the FERC and NOPR. And I asked a question of this very large group, what happens when a generator decides that they want to engage in long-term PPAs with these mega consumers and effectively take that generation offline relative to ratepayers? And the response I got back was startling. It was an environmentalist consultant who said, well, if you're just allowed to poach energy, then the whole conversation is moot. And I'm like, that's a very curious response, because that's privately held generation by shareholders and they can sell it to who they want. That's not a public asset. And yet I think many of us consider companies like Vistra to have an element of public ownership. I don't. But it is an absolute truth that if you're allowed to engage with a long-term PPA, like I think you just did with Meta, to the tune of 2,000 megawatts, the equivalent of 2 towers of a nuclear plant, that is coming off of the marketplace for ratepayers and is necessarily the cause of our increased capacity prices. My question is actually a positive one. What is Vistra doing right now to bring new generation to Pennsylvania?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, I think the Vistra Meta announcement, we announced a 20-year PPA. Just to be very clear, those megawatts are not coming off the grid. This is a front-of-the-meter deal. The megawatts will still be delivered to PJM. So what this is an agreement by a willing customer to purchase power for 20 years from a willing seller. And the good news is in Pennsylvania, residential, commercial, industrial, any customer can enter into an arrangement. Now, maybe not for 20 years if you're a residential customer, but you can enter into a long-term contract to purchase energy. And I do highlight this agreement with Meta because I think it is important to demonstrate the way where everybody can benefit from new large customers. These nuclear plants, 2 in Ohio, 1 in Pennsylvania, nuclear plants are on the path to retirement. And actually, we did see a nuclear plant retire. And so what this 20-year agreement does, one, it includes uprates. So you were asking, how are we bringing more generation to Pennsylvania? We are going to put new nuclear megawatts on the grid through this agreement. So that's number one. Number two, it gives us a 20-year agreement which provides stability, predictability, and certainty, and ensures these assets are going to remain online for 20 years. And we are actually relicensing them, so they will be around into the 50s and 60s. Other things companies like ours are doing, we've evaluated uprates at existing assets, so that's not just nuclear, that's natural gas as well. We are evaluating and reevaluating retirement decisions, so keeping around existing plants for longer. And then there are obviously conversations across the industry about new builds too. So PJM they have a reliability initiative to bring more megawatts online, and they saw almost 10,000 megawatts of response. And so generators in the market are responding. We're looking at a lot of options. In the vast majority of hours, we have enough generation, so we're really focused on less than 1% of the hours. But the market is responding, and we will continue to respond.
Thank you very much for that reply. The governor often says that Pennsylvania is open to business, and what I want to make sure that generators are hearing is that the market on the whole in PJM is absolutely devoid of enough electricity, and Pennsylvania wants it built here. Thank you.
Thank you. Final question for this panel will come from Representative Donahue.
Thank you all for your testimony today. Mr. Ellis, you put forward that instead of the PUC essentially guessing what an adequate rate of return should be, they should hold an auction. Could you describe what that would look like?
Sure.
And is the PUC as currently constituted, could they hold an effective auction?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. Thank you for the question. So this idea is really rooted in basic regulatory economics, right, or regulatory sort of principles, right, where regulation from its inception was a surrogate for competition. So the implication is that where you can have competition, you should. When the utility industry was set up back in the days of Thomas Edison and Samuel Insull, even the US government had to go to JP Morgan to finance the Panama Canal. So when these utilities were set up, they said, oh, it's a natural operating monopoly, and they bolted onto it a financing monopoly, but only for the equity, not for the debt. For the debt, it's just a given, utilities go to market, right? So the parent company, the utility operating company never comes in and says, oh, my parent's charging me 6% for debt, I want to recover that. It's just a given that they issue bonds, and that's what sets the cost of debt. So you could run the exact same process, but for the equity. So the utility comes in and says, hey, I need to increase rate base by $2 billion over the next 3 years, and I'm going to finance it 50-50 debt and equity. So for the debt, they go to the market, issue bonds. For the equity, they could do the same thing. Go to market and say, I'm issuing $1 billion of equity, and what return do investors require? Right now, the way it works is in Pennsylvania, they're authorizing an effective ROE of about 12%, and investors are willing to pay almost double what they actually invest for that 12%, which means they're voting with their dollars to say, I'm willing to accept a much lower return on the order of 5.5% to 6%. And that excess cost is just, it's basically a wealth transfer from customers to shareholders. So that's basically how it would work. It would look very similar to how debt is currently provided to utility operating companies at the operating company level where there's market competition. Your question around do regulators have the authority to do that, my understanding, I haven't worked in Pennsylvania, but in every jurisdiction in which I have worked, the regulator already authorizes financing, approves financing decisions. So when they come in and say, I want to raise debt, that actually has to be approved by the regulator, as does any increase in equity. So they already have jurisdiction. So you don't need new legislation. New legislation would help. My colleagues at AELP and I are working on model legislation, but regulators have existing authority to do this now. I'm working with Josh Macy at Yale Law School on a paper kind of untangling all the legal issues here, but so far clean bill of health in terms of whether regulators have the authority, and they do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us on panel 2. We appreciate your time and expertise. I know a number of reps will be following up with you. And for representatives, there is food in the back, if you could grab that, and we will be back here and start at 1:40, so about 5 or 6 minutes, so that we can try to keep on track. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much to everyone for sticking around, and thank you very much to our third panel for joining us. Today we have Evan Vaughn, Executive Director of Merit Action, Julia Courtry, Deputy Director for State Policy at Evergreen Action, and joining us online, Frank Kaliva, National Consultant for the Retail Energy Supply Association. Mr. Vaughn, you may begin.
Good morning. Chairs, members of the committee, thanks for your opportunity to have me come in and speak today. As mentioned, I'm Evan Vaughn, Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition, or MERIC Action for short. We are primarily an IPP organization, independent power producers, representing wind, solar, and energy storage developers, owner-operators, and manufacturers that are active at the wholesale level in Pennsylvania and across the PJM grid. So I come to you today with experience that spans not just Pennsylvania, but the rest of PJM, and hope to bring that regional perspective. This topic of energy affordability is on the minds of lawmakers and residents across the region. This is one of the many opportunities I've had to speak to this topic. And fortunately, I can say, as I'll explain today, the technologies that I represent, utility scale wind, solar, and storage, really are the best option to quickly get new energy onto the grid at low cost, which will help, as I'll explain, mitigate some of these prices. So there's been a lot of discussion about retail rates. That's not my expertise. I'm going to really stick to the wholesale environment, although as other speakers have talked to, there's some crossover. One thing that I think has been missed really substantially in a lot of this conversation about the capacity market is recall that there are two primary markets in PJM that energy is transacted through. There's the energy market and there's the capacity market. The capacity market has gotten a lot of attention because it has grown the most in absolute terms, or rather in relative terms, but the energy market has actually grown the most in terms of price of wholesale electricity over the last few years. From 2024 to 2025, the wholesale energy prices grew more than the capacity prices. Doesn't mean capacity doesn't matter, but it means we can't afford to take our eyes off the ball on energy either. And that's really where wind and solar can provide a huge amount of value, because our resources have zero marginal costs. They have no fuel costs associated with them. And as numerous studies have confirmed, both from industry and from government and financial entities, utility scale wind and solar are the cheapest resources to add to the grid today, period, even without federal incentives, which are going away midway through this year. And so I think it's just really critical that even as we talk about adding more dispatchable capacity to the grid, that we don't whipsaw 360, 180 degrees around to get away from adding wind and solar. We need an all-of-the-above strategy, and I truly mean all of the above. That includes thermal resources, it includes renewables, and it includes storage. The capacity market's been talked about a lot. I will just mention that I agree that the rising demand, this is really a supply and demand imbalance that we're seeing. Other speakers have talked to this. There was a retirement of old power plants outstripping new power plants coming online problem that existed before the data center demand growth. However, that data center demand, along with other economic growth, has certainly exacerbated those issues and has really led us to this unprecedented situation where we do need so much more capacity on the grid. What I would say here as well is not to take a absolutist approach to adding new capacity to serve these capacity market needs. Battery storage is also a fast technology that can be added alongside new gas and nuclear to help with these capacity issues. For that matter, land-based wind farms actually have a very high ELCC relative to other technologies and can be a value there as well. PJM, as it's been mentioned, is making reforms to the interconnection queue. Those reforms, as Asim Haq had mentioned, have gone through and are largely complete at this point. As I'll explain in a second, that doesn't mean that there aren't still some challenges with interconnection, but it's not a question of timing. That has largely been resolved, and our members are, as he mentioned, able to sort of enter into the queue along with other resources. So what can be done about it? This is where I'm going to spend the rest of my time. So ultimately, this is a deployment challenge on the supply side. The demand side, there's a number of solutions that folks have talked about, but from a supply side, in terms of righting that supply-demand imbalance, it's a deployment problem. And it's a deployment problem that, in contrast to what I believe the representative from the Utility Association said, is not a matter of regulation or deregulation. It's a matter of real barriers to deployment of energy. Regulation, re-regulating generation, not going to solve these problems. They would essentially be throwing money at these deployment challenges when there may be policy solutions that don't necessarily have to be expensive. Some of those policy recommendations I have include just maintaining market stability, things like the APS, like the capacity market. We need to stabilize these markets so that they can send the proper investment signals to new resources to enter and seek financing. Siting and permitting is absolutely critical. I think of the PJM queue as sort of a conveyor belt leading into a volcano. These resources are in line, they go through, they get their interconnection agreements, and then if they don't basically fly at that point, if they don't start to come online, then those developers can't afford to continue to pay the securities essentially to keep their place in line. And so if local permitting issues get in the way, if a supply chain issue gets in the way, if another issue I wouldn't have time to mention here gets in the way, interconnection costs, for example, those projects fail and they're not coming back for several years. They have to go through that 2 to 3 year process. I mentioned interconnection. That's really critical as well. You can get out of the PJM queue efficiently, but then have your interconnection cost, which independent developers have to pay 100% of the interconnection cost, not consumers. You can come out and have your interconnection cost be too high, and then your project dies anyway, because you can't finance a project that's underwater because interconnection costs are too high. So what's the solution there? Proactive transmission planning in a smarter way, not the reactive way that it's been done at PJM in the past. Order 1920 provides this FERC Order 1920 provides a great opportunity. I hope that the PUC is looking at that to find a final cost allocation agreement this year. And then finally, I would just say that reducing risk and getting to that financing place, this is where things like the APS can help create a stable revenue stream that developers can see as investable and bankable. Right now, the capacity market's really not providing that because it's been changing every single year. I think that that's probably why the president as well as the governor have sort of worked out this long-term contracting agreement that we just heard about last week, because that's a long-term revenue that would help a project get financed and come out of the queue. So with that, I will stop. I'm happy to take questions, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cortry?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Chairs Fiedler, Causer, Burgos, Metzger, and the honorable members of the House Environmental Resources and Energy Committee and the House Consumer Protection and Technologies and Utilities Committee. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify on energy affordability in Pennsylvania. My name is Julia Cortry. I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Evergreen Action. We're a national environmental organization working to support states in advancing affordable clean energy and transportation and curbing climate pollution. Since we've covered so many different topics related to energy affordability today, I'm just going to focus my remarks on some of the lesser covered areas. I think we've all talked a good bit about the drivers of increased energy costs, particularly the skyrocketing demand by data centers and hyperscalers, and the insufficient new energy supply to meet this current and projected demand. So when it comes to some of these supply shortfalls, we heard from PJM earlier that they've made significant improvements in their interconnection queue. But I think we really can't ignore its role in this crisis and the continued challenges we're seeing in the interconnection queue. The queue closed in 2022 and it just reopened. So we're seeing years of new projects being unable to enter the queue. And now we have a faster but not fast enough 1 to 2 year timeline to get projects through the queue. We just saw last week President Trump and all 13 PJM governors call for a 150-day interconnection queue timeline. So we'd really like to see a much more quick review process, especially when we think about the economics of projects over the past 5 years when it comes to inflation, COVID, supply chain shortfalls, international conflicts. There are lots of things that have made, and I guess the changing and political environments that have made building projects much more difficult and unpredictable. And so being able to move projects more quickly helps add certainty. Second, when it comes to projects once they're out of the queue, we really want to see reforms in siting processes. So projects often face lengthy and unpredictable state and local siting processes in the Commonwealth. Pennsylvania is one of only 12 states without a state siting entity, which can add years of delay and uncertainty for developers, communities, and workers alike. I believe there are over 2,500 ordinances in the state of Pennsylvania related to siting that make it very challenging for developers to plan and have that certainty. And then third, barriers to battery storage deployment. We've heard a little bit from folks today about how quickly battery storage can come online, but there have been some significant barriers to that, particularly the unfair treatment of battery storage by PJM and some of the other siting barriers. This is really the opportunity for meeting the demand between now and 2030 before we can see gas plants get built and come online. I'll skip through the rest of the cost drivers since we've talked a little bit about them today so far. In terms of recommendations, like others, we really want to incentivize data centers to bring their own energy, preferably clean energy, to add to that diversification and reduce climate pollution. We want them to pay their fair share and bear the financial risk of proposed projects. Third, we want to hold PJM and its members accountable on reforms that would address energy costs. We see the steps forward with President Trump and the 13 governors as important to bring further attention to the needs to make building projects more quickly and predictably a reality. Excuse me. And then fourth and fifth are particular. I want to go through a little bit more. Reforming energy siting, as I mentioned before. There's significant improvements we can do to streamline siting in Pennsylvania, and will also provide protections to landowner rights and technical assistance to townships and communities so that we can help just make this process a lot easier for folks to navigate. And then fifth, incentivizing battery storage, as I mentioned before, between supply chain challenges, a 5-year backlog of gas turbines. We really have very few options of getting new energy on the grid between now and 2030, 2031, 2032. And so storage is really the solution to getting energy online quickly. And we see that it is cost competitive and can also support an economic development. Finally, as folks have talked a little bit about, directing the PUC to reform utility return on equity to reduce overbuilding of infrastructure. These recommendations are not comprehensive. There's lots of creativity required. and really thank you all for the time to testify and look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you so much. Our final testifier for the day will be Mr. Khalifa. He's joining us online. You may go ahead with your remarks, and then we will get to questions from chair and members.
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Oh, excellent. Well, good afternoon, chairs and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I appreciate the accommodation to testify virtually. My name is Frank Khalifa. I'm the national spokesperson for the Retail Energy Supply Association, or RESA. We represent 20 competitive retail energy suppliers across the country, including here in Pennsylvania. While our members offer both electricity and natural gas supply, I'm going to confine my remarks to primarily talk about electricity. Pennsylvanians have every reason to be concerned about rising energy bills. Like many other costs facing households and businesses, retail electricity prices have risen significantly since the beginning of this decade across the country, and we are all concerned about this. A frequent claim, however, and one that we heard briefly earlier today, is that customers who shop for their energy supply always pay more than they would have under regulated default service, and that retail choice is one of the drivers of higher bills. In our belief, this claim does not withstand scrutiny. Many of the studies suggesting that retail choice costs more rely on snapshots in time or data that doesn't exactly match. For example, comparing today's supplier offers to older utility default service rates. Default service, often referred to as the price to compare, is not a true apples to apples comparison with competitive offers. Now, RESA has done extensive work on the competitiveness issues associated with how default service is structured, and we'd be happy to share that information with the committees. Importantly, in our view, retail suppliers are not competing against the utilities. They're actually competing against the counterfactual world in which Pennsylvania never restructured its energy markets back in 1996, when utilities owned generation, built new plants with guaranteed cost recovery, and passed those costs on through to customers. To create a more accurate comparison, RESA publishes an annual white paper, The Great Divergence, available on our website, which analyzes long-term trends in monopoly states versus competitive states. And the data shows that back in 2008, when competitive markets were beginning to really mature, competitive states were more expensive in terms of prices. Since then, however, prices in monopoly states have risen 46.5%, whereas competitive states, including Pennsylvania, have experienced significantly shallower price growth. Let me provide some additional evidence. As was mentioned earlier, RESA announced today the results of a recent poll of 808 Maryland consumers. 73% reported their electric and natural gas bills increased over the past year. And of those, 59% described the increase as significant, and 67% said they're very concerned about rising monthly costs. In our view, these concerns are particularly notable for this discussion because Maryland, beginning in 2024, took steps to effectively eliminate its residential retail market. Yet, this shift has not eased consumer anxiety or reduced bills. This illustrates what we see as a broader truth. The driver of today's affordability challenges lies elsewhere, and in most cases, competitive markets can help mitigate these pressures, not cause them. And we get into some of those drivers in more detail in our written testimony, but as they've been mentioned at length, I will not belabor that point. What does matter, in our view, is how retail choice can help customers navigate price pressures, especially during periods of volatility. Retail energy suppliers compete to offer customers the best price, value, or product features. For some, that means the lowest available rate today. For others, it means long-term fixed pricing, sometimes for terms as long as 5 years, to support budgeting and bill stability. These fixed price products help shield customers from things like the increase in PJM capacity costs. By contrast, because of the default service construct, those same capacity cost increases are passed through to customers on a shorter time frame. And these supplier products deliver meaningful benefits. RESA publishes a monthly savings report using data directly from PA Power Switch. In November 2025 alone, Pennsylvania's consumers could have saved more than $124 million by switching to the lowest price competitive offer available on PA Power Switch. We believe we should be encouraging more customers to take advantage of these opportunities while also modernizing the framework to allow suppliers to bring more innovative products to the market. Pennsylvania is widely regarded as a national leader and often the leader in retail choice. PA Power Switch and PA Gas Switch are viewed as the best shopping tools in the country. The PUC and the Office of Consumer Advocate have invested heavily in consumer education, and the General Assembly has wisely provided the PUC with the authority to maintain a balance between encouraging supplier participation and ensuring strong oversight. The result is a system where customers have meaningful power to shop, save, and select products tailored to their needs. Just want to touch on one relevant example of this balance. Contract expiration and renewal, a topic that was discussed today. Pennsylvania already provides strong, nationally admired consumer protections related to contracts. Customers receive 2 notices before a contract ends or renews. Suppliers may not charge early termination fees in between the notices. Renewal prices must be disclosed in the second notice, and if a contract shifts to a month-to-month variable rate, suppliers must provide 30-day advance notice of any price change. Additionally, automatically renewed do not include termination fees. In our view, forcing customers back to default service at contract expiration would undermine this balanced system, create an uneven playing field, and increase overall costs. In closing, retail competition is not the cause of today's energy affordability challenges, and we believe competitive suppliers offer customers tools to navigate these pressures through innovation, through choice, and through real savings. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and RESA looks forward to working with the General Assembly, the PUC, OCA, and the utilities to continue strengthening Pennsylvania's competitive energy marketplace.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that really underscores the importance of having this joint hearing. So I want to thank the Consumer Committee. I think it's a good example of an issue, direct retail, where we need to focus on prices and also on consumer protection. So thank you for that. I have one question. Ms. Courtry, if you could talk to us about battery storage. You mentioned it, you highlighted it as something that's very, very important. There are many factors we can't change or expedite as much as we might want to. I know that nearby states like Maryland and New York have laws that have helped to create battery storage procurement targets for electric utilities to meet in the coming years. As we talk about affordability and reliability, can you talk to us about battery storage and the role that might be able to play, please?
Absolutely. So I think one state I really like to talk about is Texas. They have done an incredible job of bringing on storage, especially after, I believe it was Winter Storm Uri, or when talked about earlier about the blackouts that they faced, that one of the ways that they sought to address that was by adding storage to their grid and doing it as quickly as possible. The most recent data I've found is in 2024, battery storage led to $750 million in cost savings, particularly because of the hottest days in the year. They were able to use that, while the sun is shining, use that excess capacity, store it, and use it in the evenings. So while we saw prices go up really high in PJM at the hottest times of the year this summer, we saw some benefits of both the combined solar, wind, and in the evenings, the use of storage. We can also build storage in less than 2 years. On average, it takes about 1.7 years to build. So it's a much faster speed to market. Certainly gets us to sooner than 2030. And there are still tax credits available for it. And it has a pretty small footprint compared to a lot of energy sources. So you can warehouse it depending on the size of it, but there are real impacts you can do when it comes to concerns around viewshed.
And when you refer to the availability of tax credits, you're referring to the federal money?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Chairman Causer?
Thank you very much to all of you for your testimony. We talked today a lot about increased demand. We've talked about the need to increase supply, the need to get more supply to the grid quickly. Mr. Vaughn, you talked about how we need to get get additional sources online quickly. Particularly, you were talking about wind and solar and battery storage. And as I was listening to your testimony, I was thinking, well, why isn't that happening already? I mean, what do you see as barriers to that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. So, as Awesome Hawk was saying, projects are getting out of the queue now. There's a couple different issues going on which are stopping them from getting built. One is that some of these projects, and this was a feature of queue reform, have been in the queue now for 5 years or so. And so it's hard if you're trying to finance a project to pull forward a lot of the commitments that you made in terms of supply chain and things like that. So part of what queue reform is doing is it is weeding out some projects that are not essentially able to pencil anymore. But then there are things that I think this legislature could consider that would help to solve some of those deployment challenges. That's things like, once you get out of the queue, are your interconnection costs reasonable? That's where transmission planning can come in. Permitting is a big one. You mentioned that as well, Julia. So right now, and this is not a slight to localities, but essentially whether or not we get enough energy to meet this demand is whether it's a factor of, are enough localities going to say yes to enough power plants? And that's not just solar and wind, it's anything, in order to meet demand. And so I think, I don't want to be overly prescriptive, but I think that if there's some bipartisan solution that can make it more predictable for developers of all stripes, including wind and solar, to come out of the queue and have a pathway to know what they're expected to do in terms of setbacks and environmental regulations, things like that, that would help prevent the stumbling block of going through that 3-year process of the queue only to be tripped up by something that ultimately is a state jurisdictional issue.
But doesn't it seem like even before you get to the queue, you should have those things lined up, it would seem to me?
Well, yes and no.
If it was a solid project, I guess.
Yes and no. So if you have your interconnection queue application go in, you don't actually have to have site control until you're, I think, about halfway through the milestones. And this is a PJM policy. It's not a industry position. And so you may drop out of the queue if you don't have that permit at that point. But if you are getting out of the queue and you have something delay your ability to start construction, that's when you run into trouble. So you may have landowner agreement, but you may not have all of your local permits, for example, at that point.
It just seems like I'm hearing repeatedly that some of these projects don't have their ducks all in a row, to come out of the queue and be prepared to move forward with the project. And thereby seems to lie the problem in actually putting electricity on the grid. And so just, to me, it leads to the thought that the projects just aren't ready to go, and therefore they're not providing the energy that we need. And everything in today's argument stems around getting more energy on the grid. And you folks are talking about, in particular, talking about 2 or 3 sources of energy, when here in Pennsylvania we have abundant resources. It seems to me that we do need to get multiple sources onto the grid, but we need to be able to do that quickly and be able to provide real baseload energy. And wouldn't you concede that probably the fastest way to do that is to build more natural gas plants here in Pennsylvania?
I think if you're talking high capacity factor resources, natural gas uprates, and batteries are the 2 fastest ways to do that. And maybe nuclear uprates as well. New natural gas would take longer than batteries to come online. Talking greenfield natural gas. Yeah.
If you don't mind me weighing in as well here, as a former economic development practitioner, one of the big challenges we would see with energy projects or other projects were issues around stakeholder fatigue. And so to some degree, you want your project to be mature enough before you go and talk to communities because they're limited time, capacity, bandwidth. And so I think one of the ways that we can help solve for some of the issues that you're talking about in an energy neutral way here, the time between the interconnection queue processing and along with in terms of siting and getting those local permits. You know, the quicker we can make those two processes go, it makes it so much easier for all of these other things to align. And I think at the very least, just providing like clear timelines. So even if we can't get faster than X amount of time, if it's just setting these, you know, whether it's binding deadlines so that a developer can plan, so that we know if they don't have their ducks in a row 90 days or 9 months before they're supposed to apply for this permit, they're not going to make it. So I think just adding some of that certainty will help address some of the concerns you have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Acting Chairman Gallagher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for your testimony today. Mr. Vaughn, since you've identified modernization of PA's transmission infrastructure as a possible solution to rising energy prices, what policies and actions do you recommend the General Assembly take or the PUC take in order to accomplish these goals?
It's a great question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think transmission is an area that primarily resides with the PUC, which is why I didn't spend too much time on it today. Ultimately, the way transmission has been planned and built in PJM is largely reactive. It's kind of a whack-a-mole approach. So PJM is very good about identifying reliability faults on the system and then planning in the next RTEP cycle, the Regional Transmission Expansion Plan, to address those reactive issues. But what we're seeing now is PJM's planning process not meeting the needs of this large demand growth that we're seeing. So if we are going to meet demand, this isn't a renewables or a fossil issue. It's simply there won't be enough good low-hanging fruit locations on the grid to plug into for new generation sources. And the places that do exist can be project killers. I'm aware of a project just in Maryland by happenstance that had its project costs basically doubled after it came out of the queue. So it actually had permits, had everything. But when they got their agreement back, PJM says, well, you're going to have to pay another $70 million to upgrade the grid. And so I think the PSC, and this is a $150 million project, mind you, so that's a huge chunk of change. The PSC basically here in Pennsylvania really ought to lean in, and I think they are doing this to a degree, into the FERC Order 1920 regulatory process at PJM. And this is an instance where the perfect very much could be the enemy of the good. There's a lot of debate around cost allocation and how these proactive transmission investments should be paid for. And that's one of the beautiful things about PJM and Pennsylvania being part of it, is other states will help pay for the transmission that creates a market for resources that may come online or exist today in Pennsylvania. And so that broader cost allocation of those costs beyond just Pennsylvania ratepayers for proactive lines as opposed to reactive lines, I think is really going to be key. And if cost allocation ends up being the stumbling block that stops that ultimate filing with FERC to apply these 1920 principles, if cost allocation becomes that barrier, if states can't find a way to agree, I think that's a huge loss.
Thank you, Chairman Metzger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard you say a number of times during your testimony about that wind and solar are cost competitive. And I guess if that's the case, then tell me why you're continuing to support the AUPS and more lately the Governor's Press Act that contains mandates that force consumers to purchase those specific types of power regardless of their reliability or the system-wide costs. Why are you still supporting them if it's cost effective?
Thank you for the question. So I really think for my resources, certainly, and I think this would apply to other technologies that I don't represent, the key is how do you get to that yes from your financial entities to actually pull the trigger on your project and start constructing it? And a policy like APS provides a long-term financial signal that helps companies get to yes in this environment of uncertainty. And so the capacity market is another way that there's a market signal being presented to try to get capacity to come online. And as we've seen in the last few years, even though that price is high and it's hurting consumers, it's not enough to get, and I'm not talking wind and solar, it's not enough to get, gas plants and so forth to say, yes, we can finance this, because they don't know what that capacity market's going to do in year 10 of a 30-year project. And so APS, admittedly, is a policy that's designed to help cleaner sources come online. But as I mentioned in my testimony, we do need it all. We can't be myopic and say we just want this technology or we just want that technology. The capacity market and maybe this new proposal from the president and the governor will provide some certainty for the more dispatchable resources, but we can't neglect those low energy cost resources either, because if we put all of our eggs in one basket, we're going to have cost challenges or reliability challenges. And so, we see APS as one mechanism. We're open to other suggestions, but it's one mechanism to help get our projects to pull the trigger and say we can finance and go forward.
Just a couple quick follow-ups on that. So what I did hear in there, though, is that the energy sources that you represent are benefiting from a higher cost, though, in the market.
Yeah, so if you're, the way that both the energy and the capacity market works, you may know this, but just for level setting, the marginal cost resource sets the price. And so a solar project that is bidding into the energy market is going to get the price of the most expensive marginal megawatt of energy delivery. And that's probably going to be a coal plant or something like that. And so that marginal cost does benefit our members, but by our members participating in the market, you're pushing off the most expensive resources because you've shifted that marginal cost away from the very most expensive resource. And so that's economically efficient and ultimately does benefit consumers down the road.
One of the things that's in front of the General Assembly now and that we're dealing with is, back prior to my time in the legislature, the General Assembly created what's called Act 129. And Act 129, there's a Phase 5 energy efficiency and construction component of it. And, of course, the reason why we're here today is because energy prices are increasing at a rate that our consumers and the Pennsylvanians simply can't afford. And in that program, there was a surcharge on every Pennsylvanian's bill for energy efficiency. And I guess there are some of us, myself included, who say that maybe that energy efficiency should be a voluntary choice, not a mandate where it's put onto every consumer's bill. What say you?
I think we need energy efficiency as part of the solution. I've heard somebody else say this, so I won't take credit for it, but the cheapest megawatt is the one you don't have to produce, right? So I think that as long as those incentives, and I'm not an expert on energy efficiency, but as long as those incentives are right-sized to be, even if they have a cost, their cost is less than the value that they're accruing, I think they make sense. But energy efficiency is a little bit out of my direct expertise, so I might not be able to give you a totally satisfactory answer there.
I'll also just add, Pennsylvania has an aging housing stock. And so one of the biggest things that we really can do for affordability is focusing on energy efficiency. I know when I had PECO come and look at our row home, it was not solar that they thought would be most helpful. It was energy efficiency. And so there's significant improvements that can be had from energy efficiency. And I think we should continue to explore that.
Thank you. I'd like to once again thank all of our testifiers, members, for being here. I'd like to thank the staff of both committees on both sides who did a tremendous job pulling this hearing together. I am certain that as a state legislature, we have a lot of work ahead of us to reduce costs, to ensure reliability, and I look forward to working with the chairs of both committees to make that happen. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Chair Gallagher for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank everybody who joined us today, the testifiers who shared recommendations, my colleagues for their diligent questioning, and the utility representatives for their participation. We have a clear message today. Far too many Pennsylvanians, the cost of staying warm in the winter and cool in the summer are becoming an unsustainable burden. When our constituents are forced to choose between filling a life-saving prescription or paying an electric bill, we have a crisis on our hands. Under Title 66 of the Public Utility Code, rates must be just and reasonable. Today's testimony suggests that for many families who are on fixed incomes and working-class households, we are drifting far from that standard. While we recognize the need for a reliable and modern grid, the modernization cannot be built solely on the backs of those who can't afford it. As we move forward, I am calling for three things. Greater transparency. We must check the math on every project projected capital spend to ensure ratepayers aren't overpaying for utility profits. 2, accountability on ROE. A utility's rate of return must reflect the economic reality of people of the Commonwealth, not just the expectations of Wall Street. And 3, strengthen protections. We must ensure programs like LIHEAP, CAPS are fully funded and accessible to every eligible Pennsylvania. To the families and small business owners watching today, we hear you. This hearing is not the end of our work. It's a vital step ensuring that energy is treated as a basic necessity that it is, rather than a luxury. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to all testifiers today.
Thank you. Chairman Causer?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We've heard a lot of testimony today, and I also want to thank all of our testifiers for the information presented today. What's very clear to me is that we need policy in Pennsylvania that actually promotes additional power generation here in our state. That's what's going to ensure reliability and ultimately help on the issue of affordability. So we need that public policy, and certainly look forward to working with my colleagues on these very important issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Chairman Metzger? I look forward to working with all of you to help our constituents and the people of Pennsylvania make sure they have bills that they can afford and make sure we have greater reliability. Thank you again for being here and have a good day.